Ikuta starts as the world's punchline, a boy born with zero magic in a society that worships power, while the great sorcerer's prophecy hangs over everyone like a death notice. That prophecy says a great disaster will strike in 5 years, humanity will be annihilated, and only 7 chosen saviors can stand in the way, which sounds comforting right up until you remember prophecies are usually written by people who love being vague on purpose. Then the prophecy gets a face, because the 7 saviors are not some bedtime story for nobles, but real people standing in divine light and soaking up the crowd's hope. The room treats them like salvation itself, yet the officials below are already stunned, as if even the ceremony can feel how heavy this claim is. The praise narrows down to one detail. Even the youngest S-rank mage in history is part of this lineup, so the world is betting everything on prodigies and titles instead of actual answers. Ikuta, already the kid who got laughed at for dreaming of magic, has to sit there and watch the system worship the same people who may not be enough. Back in the Ministry of Magic Grand Auditorium, the licensed mage exam under the Ministry of Magic turns into Akuta's first proof that he refuses to stay a nobody. He shows up as Akuta, a 22-year-old student with a reputation that starts and ends with people underestimating him, and then he keeps pushing until the room can't ignore him anymore. That matters because the man who was supposed to be powerless suddenly forces the world to explain itself. His power awakens at the exact moment the old rules say it should not exist. So now the question stops being whether Ikuta can survive and becomes why he was denied this chance in the first place. The answer crashes in through the news. Holes are opening all over the world, and the great sorcerer's prophecy is coming true exactly when everyone hoped it would stay theoretical. Once the first breach appears, the whole age of speeches ends and the age of panic begins. From there, the apocalypse stops being a rumor and starts eating the city alive. Monsters pour in, people run, and the magical defenses that were supposed to keep civilization standing suddenly look embarrassingly fragile for something everyone trusted with their lives. Ikuta does not get the luxury of waiting for better odds, so he throws himself into the fight as the last line between the invasion and total collapse. He powers up, lands a crushing hit, and then has to keep going against a creature that proves the world's so-called protection is already cracking at the seams. Ikuta's first real answer to the apocalypse is simple. Hit harder than the disaster hits back. He lands the deciding blow, but that only buys a breath, because the breach has already opened, and the dark thing behind it still stands on the far side of the world's broken defenses. Back in the present disaster zone, Ikuta sprints straight at the next threat, because stopping now means letting the city get swallowed. Then the winged fire creature arrives and turns panic into a full retreat, proving the people around him are no longer facing a manageable raid, but a true invasion. Ikuta refuses to run with everyone else, and that choice drags him into close combat with something far beyond ordinary monsters. He ducks the killing blow, power surges through him, and for the first time the fight starts to look less like survival and more like his hidden talent is waking up under pressure. The apocalypse keeps squeezing harder, so Ikuta has to meet raw force with raw force if he wants to stay alive. His power locks against the enemy's darkness, and when the strain finally breaks, the result is ugly but useful. He survives, and the world learns he can push back instead of just getting crushed. That survival matters because it proves the magical system everyone trusted is already failing at the edges. Ikuta blocks one more attack, starts talking long enough to force a real answer out of the chaos, and the battle shifts from pure panic into something closer to a clue hunt. The clue points to a bigger truth. The people and books that shape this world have been hiding the disaster in plain sight. A red gold book, a divine stare, and a figure announcing humanity's annihilation all point to the same ugly idea, that this apocalypse was never some random accident. Elsewhere, the public finally sees how bad things are when the crowd looks up at a towering threat and realizes their confidence was borrowed from a system that cannot protect them. One terrified man asks what is happening, and the answer starts circling back to the great Archmage's prophecy. The same morning, everyone treated like ceremony until it became a disaster report. That old prophecy only gets darker when someone asks why nobody remembers the day that mattered most, which hints that the truth has already been buried once before. Then the memory snaps into a child being seized and dragged into suffering, and the scene makes one thing brutally clear. Whatever happened back then was traumatic enough to be erased, but not enough to stop haunting the present. Just when the story feels like it is sinking into the past, a phone call from Mom yanks the focus back to the present and reminds Ikuta what he is trying to save in the first place. The apocalypse is still raging, but now the fight is personal too, which is exactly the kind of pressure that turns survival into purpose. Years before the apocalypse, back when Ikuta is still trapped in the life everyone calls worthless, his phone gives him the first real crack in the timeline. Mom steps in and Ikuta realizes the ugly part fast. This incident never happened 5 years ago, which means the past he came back to save is already changing without asking permission. Ikuta digs for answers the only way a powerless kid can, by dragging out books and chasing old records instead of throwing around magic he does not have. The red tome points him toward the dream everyone worships, becoming the strongest mage like number 1, which is a rough career plan when your starting equipment is basically a phone and nerve. The rankings app reminds him why this world is so obsessed with magical talent. 5 years ago, everyone trusted the system and the famous saviors to decide who mattered. Ikuta meanwhile survives as the isolated bookworm, the magic otaku whose only real friends are books, so his weakness turns into preparation before anyone realizes it. Then theory gets replaced by pain, because a stronger opponent tries to force Ikuta onto his knees and prove that powerless people should know their place. Ikuta dodges, gets hammered anyway, and still stands, which is the first sign that something inside him refuses to follow the world's rules. Ikuta answers with a desperate magic spike, and that one counter changes the entire mood of the fight. His opponents expected an easy humiliation, but now the so-called weak kid is breathing hard and making him recalculate, which is not how bullying is supposed to go on the schedule. The opponent restrains Ikuta and calls the amount of magic at his age creepy, so the insult accidentally becomes evidence. When the power surges again and someone tries to dismiss it as weak or fake, Ikuta has already exposed the real problem. What just happened cannot be explained by normal talent. That impossible fight pushes Ikuta into the next mystery. If his power is not ordinary magic, then he needs to know what it actually is. He looks up and finds a strange library with only 2 books, which is not much of a library, unless the books are the entire point. The 2 rune-marked books reveal the shape of his hidden ability, and Ikuta reaches for them like a man being handed proof that his curse has a loophole. When he holds both books, he understands this is not just knowledge sitting on a shelf. It is power waiting to be read. 2 young men demonstrate their skills, and the system finally explains itself. From now on, every skill Ikuta sees can appear as a book for him to acquire. Ikuta asks the obvious question, whether reading these books means he can use their abilities too, because that turns him from rejected failure into a walking theft report with homework. The answer lands quietly, but it changes everything. Ikuta grips the 2 skill books, then reaches toward another strange source of power, and the dark particles around him make the new rule clear. His path to saving the world begins by copying what everyone else thought he could never have. Ikuta finally learns the rule that changes his life. If he can see a skill, he can turn it into a book and read it for himself. That means the world's magic stops being a locked gate and starts looking like stolen property with a library card. A gray-haired mage presses him on whether he's already finished studying the other men's skills, and Ikuta answers with a kind of confidence only a newly dangerous person can afford. He says he understands them perfectly, which is less a brag than a warning that he is done playing ignorant. Back in the same training space, Ikuta moves in on a green-haired target from behind because he needs proof, not theory. The moment he reaches for a strange power source, the whole test stops being academic and turns into a live demonstration of how far his new ability can go. The power does not stay polite. Ikuta gets launched through the air, shoved upside down, and dragged into a fight where the only thing that matters is whether he can keep hold of this new gift without getting crushed by it. That struggle pays off when Ikuta realizes the real source of the power is other people's skills, not some miracle handed down from nowhere. He catches the truth, and the next beat is the dangerous one. He finally claims the ability as his own, then forces it out into the open with a green vine skill that proves he can use what he copies. Now in the aftermath, Ikuta stands before the group and gives his new power a purpose bigger than survival. He links his promise to Miki, vowing to save her too, and that lands because he is no longer just collecting tricks, he is choosing a side in the end of the world. The next problem is social, not magical. Someone calls out the fake savior label, and Araki refuses to let that insult stand. Ikuta recognizes number 7, Araki Leo, and the room turns into a public accusation because once the lie is spoken out loud, everyone has to pick whether to swallow it or fight back. Ikuta does not back off, even while hanging in the middle of the chaos, and he demands an apology like he owns the moment. When Araki Leo raises his object toward the sky, Ikuta answers with the blunt truth that the insult was no accident, and that means the fight is now about exposure, not just pride. Ikuta answers Araki Leo's smugness by hitting the wall hard enough to leave the room looking trashed, because now this argument is no longer private embarrassment but a public mess. Araki Leo stays standing in the wreckage and keeps sneering, treating the whole thing like a little boy's tantrum instead of a challenge to the 7 Saviors image. The fight over the insult turns into a bigger problem for Ikuta. If he keeps forcing the issue, the room has to decide whether the so-called savior system is real or just good marketing. That pressure spills straight into the next stage, where the story stops being about one argument and starts becoming about how the world decides who gets to wear a licensed badge and call it legitimacy. Back in the school hall, Ikuta runs into the licensed mage trap, and the Ministry of Magic's exam system gets explained as the gate that separates ordinary talent from public authority. Momo, a participant in the exam, shows off a score that makes it clear the competition is already serious, while the teacher slams the door on anyone trying to wander into the honors class without permission. Ikuta does not care about permission, and that is the point, because he is done waiting for the system to hand him a place. He says flatly that he is joining the honors class too, and that he will take the licensed mage exam in 1 month, which turns his rebellion into an actual deadline instead of just attitude. Now inside the virtual dungeon, Ikuta gets a taste of the practical trial, and the teacher makes the rules simple. This place imitates a real hole, but the safety device is the only reason the students are not getting murdered for school credit. The first target is set to F rank so the test can measure power, and Ikuta immediately learns that the exam is not asking whether he can swing hard, but whether he can survive long enough to prove he belongs. Then the trial stops pretending to be gentle. A Bivarn, which the teacher treats like an A-rank disaster, comes out instead of the easy target, and Ikuta is forced to understand that the dungeon does not care about the lesson plan or his confidence. Ikuta gets cut, and the teacher shifts from instruction to survival, explaining that escaping a dungeon is not about panicking, but about beating the boss that controls the way out. That means the test has quietly become a real fight for his life, and the monster keeps pressing until the point lands. If Ikuta cannot finish this, he does not leave. Ikuta refuses to let the Bevern turn his first real dungeon lesson into his funeral, so he throws everything into one clean hit and finally knocks it down. When he lands, the relief hits almost as hard as the fall, because surviving this means his strength is no longer just theory. The instructor checks on him, but Ikuta's bigger reward arrives from his own power. Creation reads the fight, identifies Ikuta, and gives him Earth attribute gravity manipulation. That matters because Ikuta is not only surviving monsters now, he is turning every desperate battle into another stolen step towards saving the world. The break lasts about 3 seconds, which is generous by dungeon standards. The instructor warns that another powerful enemy has appeared and uses the crisis as a lesson, forcing Ikuta to test the new skill before he has time to admire the receipt. Ikuta uses gravity manipulation against the spiked creature, and the point is not style, it is control. If he can make the battlefield obey him, then being born without magic stops being a life sentence and starts looking like the world's worst miscalculation. The creature hits back hard enough to prove the new skill is not an instant win button. Ikuta has to brace through the pressure and keep fighting, because the dungeon only cares about one result. Either he beats the boss, or he stays trapped inside. Ikuta finally turns the exchange in his favor and crushes the creature under the force he just learned to command. The victory proves something important. His copied magic is not a trick for passing tests. It is becoming a weapon that can answer real disasters. Then the destruction spreads far beyond a single monster, with the impact tearing through the area and showing exactly why Ikuta cannot afford slow growth. This is the shape of the future Miki sent him back to prevent, and every trial now doubles as practice for an apocalypse that does not negotiate. After that brutal lesson, the story shifts back toward school life, but the danger does not vanish just because the walls have desks again. Students run, gossip, and crash through their own chaos, while Ikuta's world keeps narrowing toward the next official gate, the licensed mage exam. A student called Siko by the staff gets dragged into trouble around the classroom, and Momo, a pink-haired exam participant, crosses his path as the school buzzes with exam pressure. It is messy, loud, and exactly the kind of background noise Ikuta has to ignore if he wants to reach the people hiding behind the savior myth. 30 days remain until the licensed mage exam, the Ministry of Magic's 4-year test for becoming an official mage. For Ikuta, passing is not about prestige. It is a way into the system that worships the 7 saviors, and a chance to expose why those idols failed when the world needed them most. In class, the teacher puts Ikuta on the spot by asking which of the 7 saviors he admires, and that question cuts straight into the lie he is trying to dismantle. The room hears a simple school question, but Ikuta hears the name of the public heroes who are supposed to save humanity and already proved they cannot. In the classroom, Ikuta realizes the teacher's harmless question is a trap with teeth. Every future licensed mage is expected to worship the 7 saviors. So when the teacher says any mage should want to become like those idols, Ikuta has to choose between blending in and telling the truth he died learning. Ikuta refuses to name a favorite savior because to him they are not heroes anymore. They are the public lies standing between humanity and survival. Instead, he blurts out that he wants the class to fight him, and declares he will get stronger too, which is one way to turn career counseling into a small public incident. That outburst instantly brands Ikuta as the strange new student, the guy who walks into class and challenges the room before anyone has even found their seat. But the point is not attention, it is pressure. If he wants into the ministry's world, he needs strength people cannot ignore. Ikuta pulls the conversation back to the licensed mage exam, coming next month, because the exam is his real doorway into the system that protects the savior myth. The class does not hear strategy though. They hear a reckless student claiming the 7 saviors might fail to save the world. Elsewhere, an authority figure pushes for a letter of recommendation, while a cold, top-ranked figure gets discussed as someone who does not care how others judge him. That matters because Ikuta is not just fighting classmates now. His words are already brushing against people higher up the ladder. Outside school, Ikuta sits alone and accepts the cost of saying the quiet part out loud. Everyone now thinks he is either arrogant, unstable, or both. Then the rumors explode across phones, and his warning about the 7 saviors turns into school gossip with a share button, which is a brutal little punishment for honesty. Still outside, Ikuta's old memories bite back, because before the regression, even he admired the 7 saviors. A sudden blast nearby snaps the moment into focus. Whether people mock him or not, the end of the world is real to him, and pretending otherwise already got humanity killed once. So Ikuta makes the only choice that moves him forward. He will take the licensed mage exam. With 30 days gone and no room left for hesitation, he commits to entering the Ministry of Magic's pipeline, even if half the school now knows him as the guy from the video. 1 month later, at the Ministry of Magic Grand Auditorium, the venue for the licensed mage exam, Ikuta arrives where the government filters future official mages. The other candidates recognize him from the viral clip, while Momo, a female exam participant, keeps her focus on doing her best instead of feeding the rumor mill. Inside the exam hall, the first round begins as a written test, which means Akuta's first enemy is not a monster or a savior, but a desk, a paper, and thousands of competitors. For someone born with 0 magic, even sitting in this room is already a direct challenge to the world that wrote him off. During the written test, Ikuta notices the proctor's computer and tests a dangerous idea instead of simply grinding through the questions. He activates electronic hacking, proving his copied skills can reach beyond ordinary ordinary magic, but also stepping straight into the exam's surveillance net. The officials immediately announce that someone used electronic hacking to obtain answers, so the exam is not just testing knowledge, it is testing whether candidates can hide what they do. Ikuta survives the first round at 1015th out of 3,687 people, and the officials explain this was only a preliminary cut, which means the real testing pipeline is just opening. The written test is over, and the real filter starts now. The practical round, where the Ministry of Magic stops caring what Ikuta knows and starts caring whether he can survive being targeted. While the others scramble, Ikuta keeps digging through his notes and sharpening the same thing that already got him this far, because raw talent is useless if he can't turn it into a weapon. Then the exam shifts into a survival battle, and that changes everything for Ikuta because this is no longer about passing a paper, it's about not getting erased in front of everyone. The officials deploy a virtual field, tell the group only 10 will advance, and give them 15 minutes to prove they deserve to stay in the running, which is a very polite way of saying the floor is now lava, and the staff are feeling academic about it. Inside the field, Ikuta has to read the terrain like a predator, moving through forest and arena space while waiting for the first real threat to show itself. That hesitation matters, because he is not just hunting points anymore, he is testing how far his copied skills and bind tricks can carry him when the exam stops being theoretical. The first attacker comes straight at Ikuta with fire, and the point of the exchange is simple. If he flinches, he becomes a casualty before he can expose anything. Instead of panicking, he treats the ambush like another problem to solve, and that is what keeps him alive long enough for the battle to widen around him. Then the exam starts turning into a circus, because one confident blonde examinee basically challenges everybody in sight, only to admit he was talking trash and sees the rest as props for his own highlight reel. He immediately proves he means it by blasting the other candidates apart, and the message is ugly but clear. Some people came here to pass, and some came here to humiliate the room. A female examinee answers that arrogance with a barrier, which matters because the moment someone can actually stop the blonde guy, the whole field stops looking like his personal stage. Another observer clocks him as a serious problem, and the exam's center of gravity shifts from routine elimination to a fight over who gets to dominate the field. Elsewhere in the chaos, an official on the broadcast marked Olive gets introduced, along with a mysterious figure handling a small device in the rain. And that sudden cut matters because the exam is bigger than just student survival. Someone is already moving pieces outside the candidate's little panic box, and when the object is dropped and looked at, it feels less like background noise and more like a setup for a much nastier trick. Back in the presence of the battle, that hidden move pays off by rattling another character hard enough to force a change of mind mid-fight. The moment the attack energy surges and the observers gasp, it becomes obvious the practical exam is no longer a test of skill alone, because now everyone is watching power escalate past the point of control. Momo is watching the fight tilt out of control, and that matters because this exam stops being about proving talent and starts becoming a test of who can survive the monsters these candidates keep unleashing on each other. When the blast tears through the field, even she has to admit the so-called heroics look a lot more like a disaster with good branding. The rain-soaked clash turns into a bait and switch, and the other side thinks it has Akuta boxed in until the real trick lands. His smokescreen and thorn user combo gives him a second angle nobody expected. Momo catches on just late enough to be annoyed, which is fitting, because the whole point of this move is to make the enemy chase the wrong problem while the true threat keeps moving. Ikuta uses that opening to turn defense into a counterattack, but the exchange proves he is still gambling with raw power against a faster opponent. He takes the hit, crawls back into the fight anyway, and that stubbornness is exactly what lets him force the next reveal instead of just getting flattened like everyone expects. Then the blonde male opponent stops hiding behind exchanges and reveals the real danger. He is a summoner, and his spell begins calling in a beast strong enough to change the entire exam. Momo sees the summon come together and realizes this is no longer a simple duel, because once that creature arrives, the fight belongs to whoever can survive the thing first. Inside the Ministry of Magic Grand Auditorium, the licensed mage exam stops being a contest of students and turns into a survival problem. The summoner finishes calling Fuma a commanded summoning type beast, which means Ikuta is no longer fighting one opponent. He is fighting the opponent's best card, and that card has teeth on the contract. Ikuta recognizes the danger fast, but Fuma hits before he can turn that realization into distance. The attack should erase his chance at passing the exam, so surviving it becomes the first proof that his new powers are not just lucky tricks. Instead of breaking, Ikuta absorbs the crisis and pushes back with the rare power he has been building since regression. He reveals that his skill sits in the top 0.0001%, which is a ridiculous number to say out loud, but it matters because it means the exam's normal logic no longer applies to him. That reveal flips the fight. The summoner brought Fuma to overwhelm Ikuta, but Ikuta turns the pressure into a counterattack, strong enough to smash the summoner's confidence along with his body. With the summoner down and barely breathing, Ikuta does not soften the message. He warns that surviving one hit only bought the summoner a few more seconds, because Ikuta still needs strength for the apocalypse, not applause from an exam hall. Momo, a participant in the licensed mage exam, sees the next attack coming and yells for Ikuta to run, because from the outside this looks like the moment his gamble finally snaps shut. Akuta feels that same death pressure himself, and that fear matters because it forces him to choose growth right now instead of waiting for a safer lesson. In that instant, Akuta's support guidance pushes him toward the bind skill, and his power level hits 8,100. The number is not just scoreboard decoration, since it tells Akuta his body can handle a bigger combination than before, and he immediately reaches for more because moderation has clearly left the building. Inside Akuta's memory, the advisor reminds him that skill books are normally tools to strengthen one ability at a time, and exam-level fights should not require anything extreme. Akuta rejects that caution because his real enemy is not this summoner. It is the future disaster Miki sent him back to stop. The advisor then reveals the dangerous option. Use 2 skill books at once and build a new skill inside his mind. That changes the meaning of Akuta's creation power, because he is not only copying magic anymore, he is starting to design answers that the world has never handed him. Back in the exam, Momo's simple skill explanation lands at the perfect time. Straightforward magic can be powerful because it is flexible, not because it is flashy. Then Akuta feels a sudden surge through his heart, realizes something new is forming, and the fight opens into the next stage of his evolution. Akuta has already dragged himself to the edge of something bigger than this exam, and now the fight starts paying off that warning with a real power jump. What looked like a simple trial turns into the first proof that his copied magic can be shaped, not just borrowed. That victory does not come clean. The blast leaves the battlefield wrecked, and the pressure keeps building, so Akuta and the others are forced to survive the aftermath, instead of celebrating it. Back in the present fight, Akuta stops thinking like a target and starts talking like a man who has learned how weak people get treated in this world. He calls out the fake confidence of people who worship strong skills instead of real strength, and that attitude finally matches the power gathering in him. Then the story cuts into the reason that arrogance feels so familiar to him. Ikuta's upbringing is a domestic lesson in privilege, where a chosen child is taught to look down on everyone else because his parents are powerful mages and the world keeps handing him whatever he wants. Years earlier, inside the lesson that shaped this privileged mage, he is told he can do anything he wants because everyone around him is beneath him. That is the poison Akuta recognizes now. In this world, power does not just make people strong, it teaches them to treat everyone else as disposable furniture. Back in the present fight, that arrogance turns practical when Fuma, a summoning-type monster under command, erupts into the battle and proves this is not ordinary borrowed strength. The privileged mage treats Fuma like proof that he was born to stand above everyone, which is a neat little speech to give while hiding behind a giant beast doing the actual work. The mage doubles down on his own myth, claiming overflowing talent means he needs no family, no women, no skills, and not even money. Ikuta watches that nonsense and understands the real lesson. This guy has confused being handed advantages with being untouchable, and now everyone around him has to pay for it. Ikuta is forced back into survival mode, dodging Fuma while testing what his copied power can actually do under pressure. He triggers recovery, then pushes into an enhancement effect that doubles his magic power, which means creation is not just giving him tricks, it is giving him a way to grow mid-fight. The boost comes with a cruel catch. Ikuta is already bloody, and the same increase spreads to Fuma too. So when the privileged mage mocks Ikuta for running low on stamina, the fight shifts from simple escape to a rules problem, because every upgrade Ikuta uses may also sharpen the monster trying to crush him. Fuma bears down while Ikuta is almost spent, so he stops treating the bonds like an enemy's weapon and reaches for it himself. Calling Fuma's name becomes the turn. Ikuta is not merely copying power now. He is beginning to understand the connection behind it, and that is far more dangerous than a stolen spell. Then the fight mutates again as a winged creature descends and red lightning tears into it before Ikuta can even make sense of the new threat. Ikuta's confusion says exactly why this matters. He has learned one layer of copied power, only for the battlefield to reveal another rule waiting underneath it. Ikuta stares at the weird double skill result and realizes this isn't normal copying anymore. It's a system with layers. That matters because if he can understand the rules behind one power, he can start turning borrowed magic into something he actually owns. Back in the same fight, Fuma's power swells overhead, while Ikuta is still hurt and half one mistake away from getting flattened. The monster's whole point is simple now. Whoever forms the stronger bond gets obedience, which means Ikuta has to win with connection, not just force. Ikuta stops hesitating and issues the ugliest command he can, because gentle talk is not going to save him here. Fuma answers to that shift in attitude, and that ugly little breakthrough tells Ikuta the bond reacts to conviction more than politeness. A monster that listens to resolve is bad news for anybody who thought copying magic would stay easy. Now that Ikuta understands the bond, he builds on it instead of improvising like a desperate guy with a borrowed toolbox. He wraps himself in spiraling wind, then fires off Roar of the Wind, and the technique hits hard enough to turn the fight from survival into a real counterattack. That blow forces the opponent to finally ask what Ikuta has become, because this is no longer a powerless kid swinging at shadows. Ikuta answers by pushing even harder through the attack, and the cost is obvious. His body starts breaking under the strain. Back in the aftermath, Ikuta stands ruined, but still upright, which is the only kind of victory he can afford right now. Seeing the damage and the strange light around him, he understands this fight isn't just about beating Fuma anymore. It's about proving he can keep growing fast enough to survive the apocalypse waiting ahead. After the strain of Roar of the Wind, Ikuta lands in the wreckage with a body that is still standing only because it refuses to quit. That matters because this is the first time he proves his power can do more than explode once, even if every use looks like it might snap him in half. Back at the Ministry of Magic Grand Auditorium, the licensed mage exam stops being just a test and turns into a public verdict on Ikuta, the powerless boy who keeps making impossible things happen. Momo, a licensed mage exam participant who is already caught between amazement and panic, gets pulled into the mess with him as the crowd starts treating his survival like a problem instead of a miracle. The gossip spreads fast. Momo is cheering him on, but everyone else is asking whether a savior who loses to an examinee can really save the world. Ikuta hears that doubt, and it hits harder than the fighting, because now he has to carry not just power but expectation. Then the real danger shows its face in the form of Kyoki, the top licensed mage and one of the people the system itself puts on a pedestal. He answers the room's skepticism by crushing it with raw authority, and the students around him are already laughing at the idea that a rookie could ever beat him twice. Kyoki does not bother arguing because he wants strength to speak for itself. He unleashes overwhelming magic across the auditorium, and the point lands clear enough for even the slowest listener. In this world, power decides who gets listened to and who gets buried. One woman is stunned by how much damage Kyoki can cause in a single instant, which only makes his lesson colder. He spells it out for Ikuta and everyone else. Weak people talk too much, enemies hunt the moment they sense magic, and surviving this world means getting stronger fast or getting eaten by it. That warning becomes even uglier when another mage openly states that weak licensed mages have no value in living, and he says it like he is reading a rule instead of threatening a person. Ikuta recognizes the shape of the battlefield now, because this is not just training or rivalry anymore. It is a world where the strong decide who counts as human. The scene ends on a frightened child trapped by vines. A nasty little reminder that all this lofty talk about strength still crushes the weak first. Akuta's path is clear now. If he cannot become strong enough to protect people like that, then all his new power is just expensive panic. Ikuta reaches the child before the beast do, and for the first time, his power looks less like a rumor and more like a rescue plan. He does not just blast the attackers away, he wraps the child in a barrier and proves he can protect someone without hesitating, which is exactly the kind of thing this cruel world treats as shocking. Back in the present, Ikuta is still testing how far that power can carry him, while Momo, a licensed mage participant in the exam, sees enough of it to stop treating him like background noise. That matters because Ikuta is not just chasing strength anymore, he is trying to build a method people can trust, and trust is rarer than talent in this mess. Still outside the building, Ikuta corners the real problem. He is not asking whether Momo is special, he is asking whether she comes from the future, because he has lived 5 years ahead and knows the apocalypse does not care about titles. He says even number 1 cannot save the world, which means the 7 saviors are not the answer everyone worships them into being. Momo is then dragged through the ugly vision Ikuta is trying to survive, where crisis turns into open chaos and one person alone gets swallowed by it. That is why Ikuta rejects the fantasy of a lone hero and starts framing survival as teamwork instead, because if the world is ending, a genius with no allies is just a faster corpse. He admits he has not told anyone this secret, but he chooses Momo anyway because she is the first comrade he has made, and that choice quietly changes their relationship from suspicion to trust. The contact gets more personal after that, as he reaches for her hand and stays close enough to make the promise feel real instead of heroic nonsense. When Momo asks what comes next, Ikuta finally says the part that explains all of his stubbornness. His sister might still be in danger, and that is why he becomes a licensed mage in the first place. So the strategy is clear now. He keeps growing strong enough to protect the people he cares about, while also building the allies he needs to challenge the fake saviors and the apocalypse itself. Back with the licensed mage squad, Ikuta finally stops looking like a stray outsider and starts acting like someone with a plan. Momo, the eager rookie who is already treating him like a teammate, helps turn that suspicion into trust, because once the squad knows he can hold his own, they have to start taking him seriously. Inside the dungeon, the rules turn brutal fast. Senior mages do the heavy lifting, while rookies are supposed to learn without getting flattened. Ikuta enters with that lesson already in mind, which matters because this is where he starts building the repeatable combat method that will carry him through everything later. Then the first real threat drops in, and the squad has to survive long enough for Akuta's method to matter. He gives the order, his teammates move, and what could have been a panic becomes a controlled exchange, which is the first sign that he is learning to lead instead of just endure. Ikuta does not win by overpowering the dungeon monster with raw force. He wins by chaining his copied and created magic into something flexible, while Momo backs him up with her own firepower. And that combination proves he is not just strong for a rookie, but dangerous in a way the others can actually build around. By the end of the fight, Momo is openly cheering him on, and the rest of the squad can see the same thing. Ikuta is turning talent into a real combat style. That matters because his goal is not to win one dungeon skirmish, it is to become the kind of mage who can challenge the fake saviors and survive the apocalypse when it comes. Back on the surface after the dungeon run, Ikuta immediately spots the problem with getting stronger the hard way. Killing monsters is useful, but it does not spike his level fast enough to matter. That realization pushes him toward a more ruthless plan, because if he keeps crawling forward at this speed, he will never catch the people and powers standing between him and the apocalypse. Ikuta climbs out with the squad, and Momo, the licensed mage trainee who has already started trusting his combat instincts, admits she was nervous at first. She trails off because the real surprise is not that he survived, but that he handled the fight like someone who already knows how dangerous this world really is. That leads straight into the lesson. In monster battles, raw skill is only one piece of the job, because experience and field judgment decide who actually comes back alive. Ikuta is still learning that his copied tricks and created spells only become valuable when he can apply them under pressure, not just show off in a clean win. Momo then widens the picture by explaining how brutal the licensed mage world really is, with rank and status deciding who gets heard, who gets protected, and who gets crushed. She does not sound impressed by the system either, which is why her own resolve lands so hard. She wants to get stronger too, not just survive under somebody else's title. The calm breaks when Ikuta corners a new group and someone finally reacts to him like a real threat instead of a weird rookie. The important thing here is not the fight itself, but the shift in attention. His presence is now serious enough that people start asking how he gets in, what he wants, and why he has the nerve to walk into their territory at all. Ikuta answers that pressure the same way he handles every obstacle, by staying composed and pushing his power forward instead of backing off. The woman with supernatural power asks what he wants, and he makes it plain he came to request a place among the 7 saviors, because if the world is heading for disaster, he needs a seat near the people everyone worships. Ikuta does not come empty-handed either, because he starts demonstrating the strange system-driven power that makes him impossible to dismiss. The others already know he has challenged their certainty about the 7 saviors, so now he doubles down and says the quiet part out loud. If the saviors cannot save the world, then he will force his way up to S rank and do it himself. Ikuta knows patience is a luxury he does not have, so he pushes for power now instead of later. The licensed mage world answers with the first ugly truth. Promotions take time, and anyone trying to climb fast gets hit for it. That warning turns sharp when Araki, a licensed mage examiner and enforcer, tries to hammer the lesson into him by force. But the bigger shock lands on the observers, because Kyoki has already done the impossible and tamed Fuma, Araki's phantom beast, which means the whole room is starting to realize Ikuta is not the only monster in the conversation. The real problem is no longer raw strength, it is exposure. One mage suspects Ikuta can copy other people's skills, and another immediately points out what that means. If he shows his hand too soon, every faction in the Ministry of Magic and every fake savior in Reach will come after him. A wrapped head mage tries to throw Ikuta out before he causes more trouble, but the label on him only confirms the suspicion around the room. He is already being measured like a C-rank mage, not a nobody who wandered in by accident. Then the pushback lands where it hurts most, because Ikuta wants rank not for bragging rights, but because he needs S-rank power fast enough to matter before the world ends. Ikuta refuses to back down, and the strange power inside him surges hard enough to drown out the room. This is the point where the exam stops being a formality and turns into a test of whether his new skill can actually carry the world-saving promise Miki left him. Back in the test, Ikuta finally explains the core of his ability. Absolute Barrier, a skill that creates different kinds of barriers. That changes everything for him, because the power he needs is not just offense, it is the chance to protect people instead of watching them die again. Araki charges anyway, betting that a wall is just a wall, until someone breaks it. Ikuta answers with Wall of Resolve, and when that hold starts to crack under the pressure, he does not panic. He layers in Jiron and turns defense into a counterattack, proving his skill is flexible enough to survive a real fight. That exchange forces the next truth into the open. Araki can see Akuta's barrier is real, so the fight becomes a membership test for Kyoki Squad, instead of a simple beating. If Ikuta can destroy the wall, Kyoki will accept him, which means the people watching are no longer judging his bragging. They are judging whether he is worth letting into the inner circle. Ikuta does not waste the opening. He locks in, activates bind skill, and starts fusing pressure onto Araki's power in a way that leaves the onlookers stunned, because this is no ordinary spell work and no ordinary talent. Now the fight gets serious, and Fuma is ordered to go full power with Roar of Flames. Ikuta's purple force meets that blaze head-on and starts cutting through it, which tells everyone in the room that his barrier skill is not just for survival anymore. It can actually carve a path through the fake hierarchy built around him. Ikuta keeps pressing the advantage, and Fuma's tough-looking body starts coming apart under the attack, instead of handing him the easy win everyone expects. The shock in the room is simple. The hero who was supposed to be checked at the door just made their summoned beast look fragile. Back in the licensed mage exam, Ikuta checks his status and realizes he takes no damage at all when he breaks through the Wall of Resolve in one hit. That is the trick hidden in the test. The wall only punishes hesitation, so his fearlessness turns the proctor's little measuring stick into scrap, which is a hilarious problem for anyone betting on his failure. Elsewhere in the same trial, Momo, a participant in the licensed mage exam, blocks an attack with a red barrier and forces the fight to reveal a bigger truth than raw power. When she admits she feels the same way as the person in front of her, even the elder watching from his seat realizes something uncomfortable. Not everyone tied to the 7 saviors is swallowing the official story whole. Now the fight snaps to Kiyoki, the skilled mage who leads the Kiyoki squad, and Ikuta is shocked to find him bleeding like this because someone important has already crashed into the battle. Ikuta starts to ask Kiyoki why he is here, but the real answer is already written all over the floor. This is no longer a clean exam. It is turning into a collision between the Ministry of Magic's power players and whatever is pulling the prophecy strings. The truth gets sharpened in the Grand Cathedral, where the head of the Ministry of Magic is finally named as the man who prophesied the end of the world through ancient magic future sight. That matters because Ikuta is not just fighting monsters or exam rules anymore. He is staring at the institution that helped build the whole savior myth in the first place. The scene then turns vicious as the formal attack lands on the injured man on the ground, and Ikuta sees how quickly authority can become brutality when the story starts slipping. An elder throws up a defense, dark force swallowing both sides, and when Ikuta turns, the elder is left bloodied, which makes the danger feel a lot less theoretical and a lot more immediate. Ikuta is still trying to survive the Ministry of Magic's crackdown when he answers with his own defense skill, Absolute Barrier, because this fight has stopped being a lesson and turned into a test of whether he can stand his ground at all. The barrier holds just long enough to tell him the bad news. The people running this place are willing to attack first and explain later. Instead of backing off, Ikuta fires back with creation and keeps pushing until the elder in front of him is forced onto the defensive, which tells him this isn't a normal exam dispute anymore. The blast overwhelms the exchange, and the room erupts in a mess of force that leaves both sides reeling like the argument just got turned into a demolition job. Back in the ruined room, Ikuta is left breathing hard while the elder finally looks beaten down. So for a second, it seems like Ikuta has cracked the mystery open. Then he looks around and realizes the real opponent is gone, which means the fight was never only about winning here and now. That escape forces Ikuta to connect the dots. The prophecy he's chasing is not some holy warning, but something someone deliberately warped to control the world's story. He stands there with one ugly question hanging over everything. Because if the prophecy is fake, then the saviors are not chosen heroes at all. They're part of the setup. Ikuta then closes in on the next truth through astral projection and related magic, following a location clue that matters because it points him toward whoever is still steering the lie. He keeps powering forward through that trail of blue and green magic, and the whole chase becomes a race to catch the hand behind the prophecy before it rewrites the disaster again. At the destination, Ikuta is rattled to find the Great Archmage there, which means the man behind the highest authority in magic is still moving pieces around in person. The attack that follows is brutal and direct, and Ikuta gets forced back fast enough to learn that whoever this is, he is not here to talk, he is here to keep the secret buried. Ikuta answers with raw control, dropping into a close quarters clash that only works because he can now copy and adapt what he sees, not just survive it. The Great Archmage keeps pressing him anyway, and when he finally admits he copied Ikuta's skill during the previous battle, the whole chase snaps into focus. Ikuta is not just fighting a strong mage, he is fighting someone who has been studying him and weaponizing that knowledge. Kiyoki is still trading force with the Great Archmage, but instead of just swinging for blood, he demands the truth out loud, because he finally understands this fight is bigger than one chase. The grip-tight stalemate and his shocked face tell the real story. He is starting to see the shape of a conspiracy, and that makes him dangerous. Back in the memory Kiyoki is being dragged through, a woman and a child stand under that same red haze, while the woman accuses someone below of deliberately causing that hell. Then the image turns ugly fast as a huge hand crushes the people underneath, and the point lands hard. This disaster is not an accident, it is something done to people on purpose. Back in the present facility, Ikuta sees the enemy stop pretending and hit him with the answer he has been chasing. The white-haired figure is being struck, the red mark appears, and Ikuta catches the horrifying detail that the blood around him is not blood at all, which means this whole place is built on a lie. Inside the facility, Ikuta faces the white-coated antagonist, the kind of man who smiles when everyone else should be running. The taunt about being slow lands because the enemy is not just fighting him, he is narrating the trap as he pulls the next string. That is when the antagonist finally names his skill, Mud Puppet, and the whole setup clicks into place. He is controlling the white-haired figure like a doll, which means the proof Ikuta has been chasing may have been manufactured from the start. With the lie exposed, the antagonist goes all the way and admits he orchestrated the prophecy itself, including making someone act it out so it would look real. That turns the saviors from honored champions into props in a script, and Ikuta suddenly has a much bigger enemy than a strong mage. Somewhere in the deeper past, a woman tied to the hidden planners talks like the end of the world is a project she already has blueprints for. She explains that the prophecy is staged for credibility, that false saviors are fabricated on purpose, and that the public worship is just another tool in the machinery. She does not stop at theory either. With that twisted grin and the power orb in hand, she makes it plain that the plan is to create a crisis, control the people who survive it, and keep the Great Archmage under her thumb after killing him if needed. Then the Great Archmage appears over the wreckage and corpses, sounding like a man who already knows the endgame and expects everyone else to be late to it. When someone accuses him of orchestrating everything, the scene stops being about rumors and becomes about a machine built by people who decided the apocalypse would be easier to manage if they wrote it themselves. Back in the present, Ikuta refuses to let them keep talking over him, and he answers with raw power instead of panic. The enemy tries to stall him with the usual warning that too much movement is troublesome, but that only confirms Ikuta is close to something important. The fight spikes one last time as a purple construct rises and disappears. Then Ikuta answers with a devastating blast that wipes the area clean. For now, he is not just surviving the conspiracy, he is hitting back hard enough to make these masterminds show their hand. Ikuta stays on the front foot because if he hesitates now, the people behind this apocalypse engine keep controlling the story. He presses the wounded enemy for the truth, but the reply is pure contempt. They are not here to explain themselves, only to keep moving the disaster forward. Back in the present clash, the enemy answers Ikuta's pressure with a binding spell and a brutal combo attack, trying to pin him down before he can force any real answers out of them. Ikuta takes the hit, but the important part is simpler than the flash and noise. This fight has shifted from bluffing to killing, and the enemy is still hiding behind one more layer of power. Ikuta refuses to fold, so he starts chaining his own magic together and pushes back hard enough to shock the enemy. That matters because it proves he is not just copying tricks anymore. He is learning to read the battlefield fast enough to survive whoever designed this end-of-the-world trap. Cornered by Ikuta's strength, the enemy finally talks, and the truth comes out ugly. The so-called end of the world is a ritual that calls monsters from another dimension, and any world with enough magic eventually becomes a feast for them. In other words, the prophecy was never just a warning about destruction. It was a machine built to turn magical people into dinner. That revelation hits Ikuta like a knife, because it means humanity was handed magic for a reason he never wanted to hear. The enemy keeps going, laughing at the idea of being human at all, and that cruelty makes the whole scam clear. The fake saviors and their masters are not protecting the world, they are managing who gets eaten. The enemy then stops talking and starts crushing him with raw magical dominance, treating Ikuta like the only thing standing between them and the ritual's completion. Akuta's shock says everything, because this is no longer about one enemy showing off. It is about a hidden power structure that sits above the saviors and intends to finish the apocalypse on schedule. Now the mastermind finally shows the scale of that power, gathering a massive spell for the final blow, and turning the battlefield into proof that the system itself is the real enemy. The attack erupts upward, and if Ikuta cannot break through this level of magic, then the world does not just end later, it ends by design. Ikuta has pushed into the heart of the conspiracy, but now he sees the ugly truth behind the prophecy. This is not just a battle, it is a machine built to fake salvation and end the world on cue. Savok, one of the 7 saviors, stops pretending and uses the chaos like a stage, tossing Ikuta aside as a decoy while he treats the apocalypse like his personal promotion campaign. That is the real danger here, because the so-called heroes are not resisting the disaster, they are helping direct it. Savok says the quiet part out loud. The chosen ones are supposed to survive no matter how ugly the end gets, which means the whole savior label is a shield for monsters who expect to outlive everyone else. Ikuta is not fighting a champion anymore, he is fighting a man who thinks the world is disposable. The pressure spikes again, and the battlefield turns into a test of nerve as Ikuta gets hammered by power meant to break his will before it breaks his body. Even so, he starts reading the fight instead of just enduring it, because his survival now depends on understanding what Savok sees before Savok can finish him. That insight finally pays off. Ikuta realizes Savok has been anticipating him with future sight, which explains why every exchange feels rigged in advance. The fight is no longer about raw strength alone, because if Ikuta cannot break that prediction and drain Savok's magic fast enough, the fake savior system keeps moving and the world stays on track for collapse. Ikuta realizes the strange force in front of him is ancient magic, which means this fight is bigger than Savok's tricks and much older than the fake savior show. That matters because if this power is part of the machinery behind the apocalypse, then he is not just dodging one enemy anymore, he is staring at the system itself. Ikuta stops backing up and drives his magic downward with pure stubbornness, choosing to hit first instead of getting crushed under whatever this place is built to do to him. He answers the pressure with a skill blast that tears the calm apart, because at this point survival means forcing the hidden rules to show themselves. That explosion finally exposes the thing everyone keeps circling around. Ikuta's own power is not some cheap trick, it is his personal magic, something that belongs to him alone. The reason this matters is simple. If he has a power that is truly his, then he is not stuck inside the fake savior script like the rest of them. Back in the present fight, Ikuta gets the real instruction. His bind skill can force 7 skills to move at once, but that kind of output burns his magic dry in a hurry. In other words, he can spike into god tier output for a moment, but if he mistimes it, his HP gets chewed up as the price, which is a very rude way for the world to say no free lunch. Ikuta uses that lesson immediately and throws up an absolute barrier in the present, because if he cannot stop the incoming attack here, none of the deeper truth matters. The barrier holds, and that brief success proves he is starting to fight on the enemy's level instead of just reacting to it. The battle then drops into a harsher phase as the group pushes through a red storm of power, and Momo gets caught in the blast, showing how fast this fight punishes anyone who falls behind. Ikuta now has to protect people and keep advancing at the same time, which is exactly the sort of bad scheduling that ruins a hero's day. The enemy starts enjoying the chaos, taunting them for breaking formation while the pressure keeps climbing. That smugness matters because it tells Ikuta the opposing side is confident in the system they built, so the only way to win is to rip open that system and prove it wrong. Momo takes stock of the wreckage and realizes this fight has already cost them more than pride, because every second they spend reacting gives the enemy room to reset the board. She answers with a condition. Nobody gets the information they want until the opponent is beaten, which makes this less a brawl and more a hostage negotiation with fists. The next reveal raises the stakes fast, since the enemy does not just hit hard but uses extremely rare healing magic, the kind of ability that lets a smug bastard survive mistakes other people would die for. Momo still gets thanked for holding the line, and that matters because it shows the others are finally treating her like a fighter instead of background damage control. Then the battle spills into the city, where a skeleton monster crashes the piece and turns the whole area into a test of who freezes first. Ikuta and the others square up anyway, because if they let this thing rampage unchecked, the fight stops being personal and becomes a massacre. Ikuta refuses to stay the weak kid who always needed his sister to drag him through disaster, and that choice changes the mood of the whole battle. Momo matches that confidence by standing firm and pushing the others forward, while the enemy keeps boasting about extra abilities and absurd recovery, basically admitting the matchup is rigged unless someone finds a way to break its logic. The turning point hits when a purple power surges into the fight, and the enemy's certainty finally meets something it cannot casually shrug off. In the middle of that chaos, Ikuta's real command rings out over everything else. Save this world, because that is the only reason any of them are still standing. Back in the present of the same clash, Ikuta's eyes snap open with the first skill that truly changes his life, and for the first time he stops looking like a kid borrowing other people's courage. He lunges through the corridor-level chaos and slams the fight into a brutal impact, proving that his growth is no longer theoretical. That blast leaves the enemy broken while Momo stays standing in the background, which is enough for Ikuta to claim the victory and credit her for helping make it happen. It is a clean reminder that his strength is starting to work because he is finally fighting with allies instead of surviving alone. The aftermath then twists the whole problem wider. Ikuta's body carries purple rune marks, and the people around him confirm this is ancient magic, a dead system that should not awaken in modern humans at all. A divine-looking figure appears to underline the point, because only ancient mages are supposed to use that power, which means Ikuta has crossed into territory the world thought was gone. That discovery hits harder when another voice explains that Ikuta's skill was never meant to be this limited, and that he is sitting on something far stronger than he realizes. So now the real problem is not whether he has power, but how to use it before the enemies around him, and the world itself, force the answer out of him. Years earlier, the warning sharpens into a concrete lead when a news report announces the great archmage has disappeared, and suddenly the old prophecy stops sounding distant. Ikuta and the others look out from the rooftop in the storm, because if the strongest mage is missing, then whatever is moving behind the apocalypse is already getting a head start. Ikuta, the boy who has spent his life learning that Japan's biggest disasters are never just local, hears about the crisis and immediately understands this is bigger than one city. If the world's cracks are spreading this fast, then the thing hunting the apocalypse is no longer hiding in the shadows. Back in the present crisis, the enemy's next move is built around a prisoner named Aga Himeka, a chained woman whose calm is wrong in the most dangerous way possible. The chains tell Ikuta one thing clearly: somebody already fears what she can do when she stops pretending to be helpless. The interrogation makes the real accusation plain, because this is no random captive. Igo Himeka is being blamed for controlling the Great Archmage and killing Kyoki, which means the people around Ikuta are now fighting over who used whom, and the answer could expose how the false authority structure works. Somewhere else in the same chaos, a masked figure in dark robes watches the whole mess from the sidelines and gives a single clipped response, like this plan is still on schedule. That tiny reaction matters, because it means the operation is coordinated and the people attacking Ikuta are not improvising at all. Then Kanai, the blue flame healer with a nasty habit of turning suppressed power into a personal grudge, finally gets room to move. After holding herself back for too long, she decides to stop measuring restraint and starts using everything she has, which is exactly the kind of choice that turns a losing fight into a statement. Kanai's release overwhelms the enemy and sends him reeling, proving that the side Ikuta is backing is no longer weak enough to bully at will. She doesn't just win a hit here, she shows what happens when someone who has been locked down for too long finally gets permission to bite back. As that battle settles, a larger threat drops into the fight and forces everyone to look up, because the real enemy system is still moving pieces on the board. Ikuta hears Kyoki-san called out, and the shock on the others' faces makes it clear that whatever is happening to Kyoki is tied directly to the same power that has been stealing bodies and identities. The explanation lands fast. Ashia uses corpse puppet ability, which lets him control dead bodies at will, and the other technique in play is Soul Doll. That means this isn't just murder, it is theft of a person's body and maybe even their soul, which is exactly the sort of filthy workaround the apocalypse would breed. Back in the present, Kyoki's wrapped body becomes the proof of how far this has gone, because the fight is no longer about whether he died, but whether anything of him can still be recovered. If Ikuta can pull Kyoki's soul back, then the enemy's greatest advantage is not permanent, and that possibility changes the whole war. The attack spikes again, and the battlefield collapses into wreckage, with Ikuta and everyone else getting dragged through the fallout of a power struggle they can barely control. The point is ugly but simple. When the enemy can throw bodies around like tools, surviving the blow is never the same thing as winning the fight. At the end of it, Ikuta reaches the small doll version of Kyoki, and holds on like he refuses to let the truth disappear again. Momo, the pink-haired girl on their side, celebrates because any sign of recovery matters now, while Kyoki's final warning hangs over everything. Stopping the end of the world may require accepting a brutal truth about how the world itself works. Back in the city after the wreckage, Ashia warns that Ikuta is not dealing with one enemy anymore. If other forces are chasing the apocalypse too, then the real problem is no longer just surviving one attack, but figuring out who is trying to end the world for their own reasons. Momo, the pink-haired fighter on Ikuta's side, answers that the only way to keep up is to sharpen her skills and become useful. That matters because this whole mess has already proven that raw panic gets people flattened, while trained hands at least buy everyone a chance. Still in the present, someone sees Momo's healing and wants to know where she picked it up, because it is not a normal trick to just stumble into. Momo admits she got it while buying crepes the other day, which sounds absurd until you realize this world keeps handing out life-changing power in the most random places possible. Momo then tests that new power in the city, but the gray-haired mage cuts in and tells her she is using it wrong. He follows that with blue flame technique, proving this is not just about brute force, but about understanding what a skill really is and how to wake it up properly. That lesson snaps into place when the gray-haired mage explains the ugly truth. Skills have a front and a back, meaning the same power can hide a deeper nature underneath a version everyone sees. Akuta realizes he copied something much bigger than a single trick, and that insight pushes the story forward because copying alone is useless unless he learns what the power is actually built to do. Elsewhere, the danger stops being theoretical when Miki is called out as being in trouble. Akuta's world has moved past training and rumors now, because if Miki is caught in the middle of this larger system, then the apocalypse is no longer some future disaster hanging in the distance. In the city streets, two characters compare what they have seen and ask if the future warning is really true. Then they rush forward together because hesitation is already too expensive. The warning turns concrete in the next breath. If things keep going like this, somebody important is about to be swallowed by whatever is coming. Miki answers that threat with pure stubbornness, holding on to the small creature in her arms and refusing to back down. That stubbornness is not just brave, it is the only thing standing between her and the force closing in on her, and the close-up on her face makes the point plain. She is past fear and into resolve. Then the scale explodes upward, and the threat stops looking human at all. A massive cosmic force tears open the moment. Figures hang inside it like they have already been claimed by something bigger, and the story makes its next turn clear. Ikuta is no longer fighting isolated enemies. He is staring at the system behind the disaster. Out of that chaos, an antagonist steps forward and snaps straight into challenge mode, calling out Roku for a showdown. He does not come to negotiate, which means the fight is now personal and public at the same time. The worst possible combo for anyone hoping to keep control. At the same time, another arrival cuts across the destruction and says exactly why he is here, to pick someone up. That line matters because it turns the scene from a pure brawl into a rescue under pressure, and it forces Ikuta and Momo to survive long enough to stay in play at all. Ikuta and Momo end up pulled together in the middle of the pressure, and Ikuta immediately answers with bind skill. He is not just reacting anymore, he is using creation and copied power to lock the situation down before the enemy system can scatter everyone again, which proves he is finally starting to fight like someone who expects the world itself to move against him. Ikuta is still hanging on to the chaos when someone orders the others to hold steady, because the enemy's pressure is about to tear the whole rescue apart. Then the building detonates around them, and Ikuta stays standing through the wreckage, which tells everyone he is no longer the powerless kid the world used to spit on. Outside the collapsing structure, Ikuta keeps moving fast enough to stay in the fight, while the rest of the group regroups around him. That matters because this is no longer a lone grudge match. It is a race to survive long enough to find out who is really behind the disaster. Momo, the licensed mage exam participant who has been dragged into this mess, makes the stakes personal by saying Miki is important to their side too. Ikuta's answer is simple and ugly in the best way. He is taking his sister back no matter how many enemies, factions, or secrets stand in front of him. The fight stops being a local crisis when monsters pour out of a dimensional hole and force everyone to run for their lives. Ikuta is still strong enough to keep one of those beasts from swallowing them whole, but the real problem is bigger than any single monster now, because the opening itself is the threat. Momo stays at Ikuta's side, and that shared stance makes the truth impossible to ignore. The two of them are tied to the end of the world. Once that connection becomes clear, the monster looming over the city is no longer just a target. It is proof that the apocalypse is already reaching for them. Back in the middle of the escape, Ikuta triggers a bind skill that combines Kathoth User and Iron Body, using the enemy system against itself. The binding surges hard enough to feel like a reset, and that break in the pressure shows his copied power is starting to do more than survive. It is rewriting the fight. Now in the city, Akuta is still in the middle of the aftermath when a white-haired man carries him and says Miki is not his big sister. Akuta can only stare and blurt out his confusion because whatever he thought he knew about his sister is starting to crack open. The moment turns intimate and vicious at the same time. Akuta sees enough to realize this conversation is about more than family, and the shock hits him hard. He surges forward in anger, and that outburst proves he is not just chasing power anymore, he is chasing the truth behind the person he thought he had to save. Ikuta steadies himself in the next beat and starts using his power with real control instead of blind panic. He channels magic through his hand, then stacks multiple abilities at once, including electronic hacking, phantom beast Fuma, absolute barrier, and mud puppet, which shows how far he has come since the world first treated him like a mistake. That progress gets answered immediately by brute force from below, as a massive blast slams into Ikuta and threatens to erase the advantage he just built. The point is clear now. Even with creation, copied skills, and new bind techniques, he is still fighting enemies who can hit back at the scale of the apocalypse itself. Ikuta catches the name of his future self in the middle of all that power, and for a second it feels like the past is answering back. Whatever he is seeing now is not random flash and noise anymore, because the next thing he sees is proof that his world is split between people who can break it and people trying to survive it. Momo gets dragged into the chaos as the battlefield swallows the city, and Ikuta sees the cost of hesitation in real time. He is no longer just trying to grow stronger for pride or revenge. He is trying to keep the people beside him alive before the whole place turns into a crater. One of the fighters starts laughing because he thinks he has finally crossed the line into a higher tier of power, but that confidence is already rotten. The marked palms and reckless grin tell Ikuta the real danger here. This is the kind of power that burns its user first, which means the enemy is winning by setting the rules of the fight. Momo pays for that illegal burst of strength immediately, because her body locks up under the backlash and the reset effect kicks in. That is the ugly lesson of the bind skills and ancient magic in this world. They can bend the fight for a moment, but if you push wrong, they break the user before they break the enemy. Somewhere in the fallout, the fight keeps dragging people downward as one body falls and Momo throws herself back toward the blast to scream for Miki. The point is brutal and simple. This is no longer about winning a flashy clash, it is about reaching the person who matters before the damage becomes permanent. Back in the quieter aftermath, a hand with a strange sigil and a girl clinging to a younger one give Akuta the emotional shape of this whole mess. He starts to understand that the power he is chasing is tied to protecting someone specific, not just to proving the savior's wrong. In the hospital now, Ikuta wakes up confused, and Momo is the first thing anchoring him to reality. When he remembers the men who came after him, the scene stops being a dream and turns into a warning, because the people hunting him are still out there, and his body may not survive what comes next. Ikuta faces the harsh limit of desperate magic, then immediately starts asking the only question that matters to him now, whether creation can be pushed beyond that limit. He is not content to survive as a weak copy of other people. He wants a way to turn his skill into something that can actually stop the apocalypse. That search leads him to a useful lead, because he already knows someone who can see through the hidden side of his ability. So when he says he has a good person in mind, it means he is finally building a plan, instead of just stumbling from disaster to disaster. Back in the Ministry of Magic Grand Auditorium, the tense meeting breaks apart in the worst possible way, with one injured mage standing up and deciding that conversation is over. He throws out a killing threat instead of an answer, which tells Akuta exactly how dirty this whole bind skills business is getting. Now alone in the library, Akuta checks the hidden place his skill is supposed to lead him to, but something feels off immediately. He knows creation is here somewhere, yet the atmosphere says this is not going to be a normal search, and that matters, because he is looking for a power that can actually save Miki and the world. Then a silhouette cuts in from the dark and calls him out for the real reason he came, so Akuta stops pretending this is just curiosity. The answer turns his whole search upside down when the figure reveals itself as his middle school self, and that means the thing guiding him is tied directly to who he was before the apocalypse wrecked everything. His younger self starts with the obvious truth Akuta has been trying not to say out loud. He always envied everyone else's magic. That confession matters because it reframes creation as a wish made real, not a random gift, and the childish excitement over it is hiding something far more serious. The question lands hard. What does Akuta actually want? And what kind of magic does he need to become that person? The answer is not a schoolboy fantasy, because the voice pressing him here keeps dragging him back to one ugly truth, that he wants strength because he cannot save Miki any other way. Once that desire is exposed, the power stops acting like a mystery and starts acting like a weapon being handed to him. Ikuta is told he can become stronger than anyone. Then the second skill awakens too, which means his ability is not just copying magic anymore. It is starting to open into something much bigger and much more dangerous. The revelation reaches its core when the source of all this is named as his own magic, and the space around him starts behaving like it belongs to him. That is the real turn in the scene. Akuta is not borrowing power from other people anymore. He is beginning to claim a field of magic that answers to his will, which is exactly the kind of growth he needs if he is going to face the apocalypse head on. Earlier, Ikuta is still in the middle of learning what his own power even even is? And the answer is already getting ugly. The dark magic around him swirls like it has a mind of its own, which tells him this isn't a normal spell anymore. It is something ancient and personal that wants a real owner. Outside, Momo, the licensed mage exam participant, fights like her life depends on it, because in this world, getting blindsided by magic can end you fast. She throws up Absolute Barrier, turns the attack upward, and sends the attacker flying, proving she can hold the line even when everything goes sideways. Back in the confrontation with the white-haired man, the truth of the chase snaps into focus. He is here to drag Ikuta into custody, but Ikuta is already gone, and that disappearance matters because it means he is no longer just a target. He is a moving problem the enemy cannot easily pin down. In the void around him, the pressure ramps up until the fight stops looking like a duel and starts looking like a test of who owns the battlefield. One side insists the current form is hopeless, while the other answer is a brutal power surge that tears up the land and drags everyone else into the fallout. Momo, who has been trying to keep up with Ikuta's impossible pace, realizes he is conscious again and calls out to him in disbelief. That shock matters because it means whatever just happened was not a random burst of magic. It was a real awakening she can actually witness. Then the scene names the breakthrough outright. Ikuta's second skill activates. He stands in the middle of that raging power like he finally understands where he belongs. While Momo's confusion makes the cost obvious, because this kind of growth is so far beyond ordinary magic that even allies can barely process it. Later, the fight shifts back into raw survival, as an opponent keeps hammering the field with destructive electricity. Ikuta does not flinch, because if he gives ground here, he loses the chance to prove his new power can actually control the chaos instead of just surviving it. Ikuta finally answers with the thing he has been building toward, Bind Skill, the fake savior seal, turning the enemy's own advantage into a leash. That sudden reversal shocks the opponent and lands Ikuta the kind of opening he needs, because this is no longer about copying magic, it is about trapping and overruling people who were supposed to be untouchable. With the seal biting into the fight, the opposition tries to overwhelm him with a mixed elemental blast, throwing fire, lightning, and green energy at him all at once. Ikuta stands in the center of it, wrapped in red power, and that tells him his growth is finally catching up to the scale of the disaster he has to stop. Right now, Ikuta has stopped fighting like a powerless outcast, and starts fighting like the one person who can hijack the apocalypse's own rules. So the next question is simple: can his stolen and inherited power actually break through to Miki before the world takes her again? The masked man finally panics when Ikuta answers the mixed attack with Reset Extreme Black Light, a technique strong enough to turn the enemy's pressure back into punishment. The attack keeps crushing the masked man, but the real shock is not the damage. The real shock is that Ikuta survives using it without recoil, which tells the observers his body is no longer running on ordinary magic limits. And that is a terrifying upgrade for a guy everyone used to write off as defective. Momo, a licensed mage exam participant watching Ikuta's growth up close, realizes he is compensating with magic collected from everyone around him. So when she asks whether this is his answer, she is really asking whether Ikuta plans to carry other people's power as the price of saving them, and his response is so unlike the old him that even she cannot process it cleanly. Ikuta finally explains the core of it. Inside him flows the magic power Miki left behind when she sent him back 5 years. That means his strength is not just copied spells and clever seals anymore, it is his sister's last command still moving through him, which is a heavy inheritance to keep in your ribcage. Because Ikuta follows Miki's power, instead of just chasing more raw strength, he finds the path forward and tears open the way himself. He launches through the breach with one goal now: not winning the fight, not proving the savior's fake, but reaching Miki and saving the person who made this second chance possible. Inside the breach now, Ikuta arrives where Miki is, and Momo witnesses something that should not be possible. Ikuta has forced open a dimensional hole on his own. But the rescue immediately twists into a knife, because Miki rejects him and says she does not need him, turning his victory into the worst kind of obstacle. The person he came to save refuses the hand. Momo breaks at the rejection, and the situation detonates before anyone can steady it. Kanai, the blue flame healer caught in the chaos, gets pulled into the disaster too, which means Akuta's personal rescue has now spilled into everyone else's survival. After the blast, the moment narrows into a confrontation with something far larger than a normal enemy. The figure in ceremonial garb stands calm while destructive power towers over Momo, and her repeated denial says what the story is screaming. This is no longer a test Ikuta can pass by being talented. Then the same catastrophe starts repeating, with Momo and Kanai dragged back through the explosion as if the disaster has put them on a cruel loop. Each repeat proves the rescue is not simply failing once, it is failing again and again. So Ikuta has to break the pattern before Miki, Momo, and Kanai are swallowed by the same doomed outcome. The ceremonial enemy finally stops treating this like a messy accident and singles Ikuta out, because Ikuta is the one variable the disaster cannot predict. Power gathers around him, and the threat expands toward Momo, which means the fight has shifted from passing an exam to surviving a force built to erase witnesses. Inside the ritual chamber, 2 observers find the body on the platform, and realize the missing piece was Miki, Akuta's older sister, and the one tied to the forbidden regression spell. Their shock turns the rescue into something uglier. Miki did not only escape their control, she took the Book of Regression with her, which explains why the past itself has become a battlefield. In the same chamber, a young mage notices the panic and asks what went wrong, but the answer is worse than a simple chase. One of them admits he cannot leave, so the enemy has to act through the strange force dragging him upward, which is a very dramatic way to say his mobility plan needs work. Back in the rift, Ikuta drops into the collapsing space instead of waiting for the disaster to deliver Miki back in pieces. When someone calls for him to stop, he chooses the opposite, because saving Miki is no longer a side mission. It is the reason he is willing to tear into this world directly. Ikuta understands the enemy has entered this world personally, and that changes everything. Now the person hiding behind the catastrophe can finally be reached. He calls it perfect because his creation-born advantage gives him a way to attack across space itself, and when he names space Transcendence, the enemy learns Ikuta brought a key to a door nobody wanted opened. Ikuta takes control fast, not by winning a fair duel, but by turning the battlefield into a place where his opponents cannot properly defend. His speed and repeated attacks prove the point. If they drag Miki into this trap, they now have to survive the brother who came to collect her. Then the demand lands plainly, give Miki back. The enemy answers with an extreme technique, and the whole exchange erupts into a brutal contest of power. But the important turn is that Ikuta no longer fights to understand the loop. He fights to break through it before Miki disappears again. Ikuta stands his ground inside the ruined battlefield, and that alone changes the mood. The trap is no longer about whether he can survive, but whether anyone here can stop him before he reaches Miki. The enemy keeps forcing the fight wider, but Ikuta refuses to be dragged off purpose, which is bad news for everyone who thought kidnapping his sister was a clever plan. Then the real problem shows itself. The enemy's magic starts feeding into Ikuta instead of simply crushing him. That means every desperate push against him risks making him stronger, which is a terrible discovery to make mid-fight, right around the number 8 for anyone keeping score with sweaty hands. Ikuta answers by pushing his copied power into a higher state, not to show off, but to break through the wall between him and Miki. The enemy throws out a full-force counter, yet the exchange only proves the gap is closing faster than they can explain it. That pressure cracks the fight open into something uglier. Someone calls Ikuta out for acting as if the world matters more than the people bleeding beside him. The accusation lands because Ikuta's whole mission comes from Miki's forbidden power, so if he loses the reason he fights, saving the world becomes a fancy excuse with a body count. Ikuta snaps back where it matters most. Momo, a participant in the licensed mage exam whose skill others dismissed, is not worthless. That defense hits Momo harder than any attack, because Ikuta is being judged as a future savior while still choosing to protect one overlooked person in front of him. Momo rejects the fake ideal outright and declares that whoever stands against that kind of protection is no savior. Her power surges with the conviction behind it, and the nearby witnesses freeze because the supposed weak link has just become the moral center of the battlefield. Years earlier, in Momo's memory, the word savior carries a much simpler meaning than prophecy or public worship. A child hears about the strongest skill and asks what strength is for, which matters because this memory explains why Momo refuses to accept power that treats people as disposable. In that memory, an adult teaches the child that strength only deserves respect when it helps others. The lesson is almost painfully plain, which is probably why every arrogant mage in this world seems to have misplaced it under a very official-looking robe. The child asks whether he could become a savior too, and the answer is gentle but decisive. Yes. Back in the present, that remembered promise catches in the throat before it can fully become words, because Momo now has to decide whether Ikuta is living up to that ideal or breaking under the weight of Miki's command. Back in the present, Ikuta finally stops arguing with his ideals and answers the enemy mage with force. He pours everything he has into the attack, and the enemy mage drops hard enough that the battlefield goes quiet, which tells everyone nearby the same thing. Ikuta is no longer fighting like a student trying to pass a test. But the victory does not look clean, because Ikuta stands over a motionless opponent while the command to die still hangs in the air. Momo sees the line he is about to cross and calls him out, forcing the real question into the open. Is Ikuta protecting people or becoming another mage who treats power like a license to erase whoever annoys him? The enemy mage tries to twist the knife by telling Ikuta to steal even more magic. If he wants to get even, that is the nastiest possible bait for a boy born with zero magic, and it lands right on the old wound. This world never stopped poking. Ikuta remembers what he actually wanted before revenge started crowding the room. He wanted to be like Miki, his sister, someone who fights for others. That memory matters now, because Miki is not an abstract ideal to him. She is the person who sent him back with one job: save the world before the apocalypse kills everyone again. That choice changes creation itself. The skill reacts to Ikuta's feelings, and the explanation hits like a rulebook finally opening to the important page. Creation is not just another tricky copy, it is the first skill that ever existed, and it reshapes itself around what he is trying to protect. The price comes immediately, because Ikuta's body takes the strain before his mind can even catch up. He bleeds, staggers in the ruined battlefield, and hears Miki's name cut through the chaos, which turns this from a fight for pride into a race to save his sister. Then the skill finally shows its true face, and even Ikuta does not understand it at first. He says his magic power is sitting at 0, which should mean he is finished, but the enemy mage has pushed him into the one condition where creation refuses to stay empty. Ikuta stops holding back and makes the threat plain. He will kill the enemy mage and sweep away every weaker ally standing behind him. The counterattack answers before anyone can laugh at the Zero Magic Boy, and the enemy mage realizes the impossible problem in front of him is not numbers, rank, or talent, but Ikuta using a savior's magic for someone he refuses to lose. Ikuta spells out why the power keeps rising. When it is used to protect someone, magic wells up without end. The enemy mage rejects the idea because infinite magic power sounds stupid on paper, but Ikuta is already walking proof that this world has been worshipping the wrong kind of savior. The enemy mage cannot process why his sure hit attacks stop working, since his whole trick is supposed to jump through space and ignore distance. Ikuta answers with a real nightmare. Once his eyes copy a skill, that stolen rule belongs to him too, which means the old advantage is gone, and the Zero Magic Boy has turned the mage's own cheat code into homework. So when the enemy mage throws out another attack, Ikuta stops treating this like survival and starts treating it like a verdict. He calls on his first skill and finishes the exchange decisively, proving that copied magic in his hands is not imitation, it is escalation with receipts. With that fight settled enough to move, Ikuta's priority snaps back to Miki, his sister, and the person he is racing to save. He tells the two people with him to return to their own world, because staying here only slows the rescue down, and every second spent arguing is another second the ritual gets closer to winning. The escape path does not stay open for long. A ritual guard raises a skeleton and blocks them, making the enemy's purpose plain. Ikuta and his allies are not just trespassing, they are interfering with something the enemy is willing to kill for. Momo, a licensed mage exam participant caught in the chaos, realizes Ginji is already out cold and names Roku as the one still in play. When someone demands to know who these attackers are, the answer is basically a death notice. They are here to protect the ritual, and if dying helps that, they are perfectly comfortable asking with a straight face. That forces the defenders to split the problem in two. Somebody has to hold the ritual guards here, and somebody has to let Ikuta run for Miki. Momo steadies herself through the panic as a swordsman orders Utai to escape, and when Utai hesitates, Momo makes the call that matters most. Ikuta has to go save his sister now. Ikuta accepts the opening, even though leaving allies behind costs him the comfort of fighting every battle himself. Momo's gratitude lands fast. Then the next surge of magic answers her doubt, and the defenders decide that buying Ikuta time is no longer a desperate favor. It is the only move that gives Miki a chance. The ritual guards try to shut that chance down together, but the defenders refuse to let them chase Ikuta. Their stand changes the shape of the fight. Ikuta is no longer trapped in a brawl, because his allies are taking the punishment meant to stop his rescue mission. Then the power between the defenders starts matching up in a way it never could before. Kanai, the skill user with healing power, feels it alongside the others, and Momo stands in the middle of that combined push as their magic finally breaks through the enemy's pressure, giving Ikuta the opening he needs to rush toward Miki. Ikuta feels the borrowed magic surge through him, and the whole rescue stops being a gamble on guts alone. For the first time in this trap, his zero magic past is not the thing defining him, because creation and copied power are giving him enough force to keep moving toward Miki. Inside the enemy's stronghold, Ikuta searches for Miki with the kind of urgency that leaves no room for second thoughts. He knows the longer the ritual continues, the closer his sister gets to becoming the price of someone else's plan, so he charges through the burning corridor instead of staying with the main fight. Behind him, the defenders pull the guards into a 2-on-2 fight to keep Akuta's path open, but the enemy count immediately turns ugly. Sagai, the ally Ikuta recognizes in the middle of the chaos, realizes there are 3 threats in play, which means the rescue team is already being outnumbered while Ikuta is separated from them. Deep inside the alternate dimension, the fight stops looking like a simple rescue and starts revealing the enemy's real preparation. One combatant admits he was cursed there, and that word matters because this war has been rigged long before Ikuta arrived to interrupt it. Momo, the exam participant who has been fighting beside Ikuta's side, smiles through the danger because the curse is finally showing its shape. The monster tied to that power is identified as SSS rank, which turns the room into a very expensive warning label. Whatever cursed him was built to cripple someone who should have been nearly impossible to stop. Momo takes control of the explanation, and her confidence lands harder than another attack. She explains that she saw the world where monsters invaded, and in that ruined future there was one person so troublesome that the enemy had to deal with him early. That troublesome person is Ikuta, because even in the disaster timeline, he becomes too strong for the invaders to ignore. The curse was not random cruelty. It was strategy, planted so that 5 years later he would not be able to fight at full strength, which is an absolutely nasty way to schedule sabotage. The revelation hits because even the strongest savior could not save him from that curse. Ikuta begins to understand what was done to him, and the enemy laughs because the person who ruined his future is standing close enough to admit it to his face. Back in the city, the enemy accepts the situation and changes the battlefield. Instead of chasing explanations, an absolute barrier activates around the area, trapping everyone inside a dome. So Ikuta's rescue mission now has a second timer: save Miki while the city itself becomes a prison. The entity inside the barrier understands what kind of power it is facing, and that recognition is the real turn. Ikuta and his allies have forced the enemy to stop hiding behind confusion, which means the next fight will not be about surviving the trap, but breaking the structure of the war itself. Back inside the absolute barrier, Ikuta reads the fight correctly. Even with his copied power helping Kanai, Doruju is still too much to handle cleanly. Doruju presses in anyway, turning the rescue into a brutal test of whether Ikuta and Kanai can fight as one before the city prison crushes their options. Kanai fires off Blaze Utone to force Doruju back, but Doruju does not break, and that is the first bad sign. The attack that should buy space only proves Doruju can overpower them head-on, and when Doruju forms a blade, the threat shifts from raw strength to something older and nastier. Terrible timing for a weapon reveal, but Doruju seems very committed to the presentation. Doruju makes the point simple: if Ikuta and Kanai stay in this exchange, they die. Then the real rule of the fight appears, because Doruju's ancient magic is tied to a cursed eye, which means looking at the enemy can become a death sentence. The curse starts destroying the victim's body from the inside, so this is no longer just a power contest. Kanai gets caught in it, and Doruju mocks the pain like he is explaining bad customer service instead of murder. Kanai refuses to fold, and that refusal matters because Ikuta needs an ally who can keep moving while the curse tries to eat her alive. When he calls out to her, she forces out a new surge of power and breaks the curse's hold, proving Doruju's eye is dangerous but not absolute. That changes Doruju's plan immediately. If the curse cannot end the fight, Doruju chooses brute force, which means Ikuta and Kanai have solved one problem only to meet the heavier one standing right behind it. Ikuta finally names the deeper problem. Doruju is not merely a curse user, but a monster with 3 times Kanai's power. So Ikuta stops treating this like a duel and turns it into an alliance strike, telling Kanai they have to hit Doruju with everything at once. Subtle strategy has left the room and taken the door handle with it. Kanai answers because she wants to be useful to Ikuta too, and that emotion gives the attack weight beyond damage numbers. She pours herself into Fireball Flame Cyclone Absolute Barrier Tile Breaker, aiming not just to hurt Doruju, but to crack the structure trapping everyone inside. With that strike landing, the fight finally points at the bigger war. Ikuta's side can survive Doruju only by breaking the systems that make monsters like him untouchable. Kanai's combined strike finally does what raw courage could not. It blows through Doruju's protection and leaves him beaten in the wreckage. The victory matters because Ikuta's side has just proven alliance magic can punch above impossible numbers, though the neighborhood may want a refund on being a battlefield. In the ruins, a girl shields a child, which turns the win into a reminder that every experiment in power has civilians standing too close to the blast radius. Then a skeleton watching from the night admits Noroko has lost. So Doroko's defeat is not the end of the threat, it is a report being passed up the chain. A blue-lit fighter steps forward with permission to handle the rest, and the gratitude he gives back makes this feel less like a solo rescue and more like a handoff between allied powers. He tells them to show the enemy what they can do, meaning the battle is shifting from survival to demonstration, which is a dangerous little word when buildings are already filing complaints. The next attack spreads across the battlefield to prove the point. Humanity still has someone strong enough to make the enemy hesitate. For Ikuta, that matters more than the spectacle, because if the fake saviors cannot save the world, then every real weapon outside their legend becomes part of his path forward. The blue-lit fighter asks if he can take the rest, accepts the answer with thanks, and notices his body feels lighter than it has in a long time. That single detail says the alliance is not only adding firepower, it is restoring fighters who should have been spent, which changes how long Ikuta's side can keep fighting. He orders another display, and the battlefield freezes under the force of his power. The message is blunt. This war is not won by titles like Savior. It is won by skills that actually work when the enemy is in front of you. But the enemy answers with a monster marked by cursed power, and the figure in command treats the loss like a reset instead of a defeat. When he says they will start over, he reveals the deeper horror of this war. Ikuta is not just fighting strong enemies, he is fighting a system that can replace them and keep going. Inside a sheltered room, a calm child watches as the next skill comes online, and that calm makes the danger feel even worse. Sage, an ally tied into the Seven Saviors conflict around Ikuta, activates absolute water temperature, a skill that controls moisture temperature with terrifying precision. Sage drives that power into the monster, and freezes the fight around the rules of his skill instead of brute strength. Kanai is stunned because this is the kind of ability that rewrites a battlefield without needing a speech first, which is polite of it. Sage's skill can also be modified towards scorching heat, so the clash becomes a test of adaptability, not just elemental force. Even the skeleton recognizes it as terrifying, and then Ikuta answers with a line that defines his whole existence. He has no magic at all, which makes every copied skill, every alliance, and every created advantage a rebellion against the world's rules. Ikuta refuses to let the skeleton set the terms of the fight, so when the next killing strike comes from above, he draws his sword and answers it with a simple promise. If the enemy keeps coming, he will cut it down. That matters because Ikuta is not trying to survive by luck anymore. He is testing whether his copied powers can stand against an enemy built to ignore ordinary magic. The skeleton immediately proves why this fight is dangerous. Ikuta dodges once, but the skeleton explains that even a scratch from its blade can be fatal. So Ikuta's problem is not winning a long exchange. It is finding an answer before one tiny mistake ends the whole comeback tour. Ikuta pushes absolute water temperature harder, but the skeleton catches the logic and mocks the weakness in it. A body with no moisture should be immune. For a second, the skill that looked unbeatable turns into a dead end. again, which is a rude thing for a skeleton to point out while holding a sword. Ikuta accepts the skeleton's argument and then flips it on its head. The skeleton has no moisture, but Ikuta does, so he turns the skill inward and uses his own body as the fuel for the next attack, turning a block technique into a new weapon. Momo, a participant in the licensed mage exam, can barely follow Akuta's movement now, which tells everyone watching that this is no longer a normal duel. Akuta has stopped reacting to the skeleton and starts overwhelming it with sword technique sharp enough that even observers have to admit the boy with no magic is fighting like a trained monster. The skeleton recognizes the form as sword dance, and that recognition changes the mood of the fight. Ikuta is not only copying powers, he is stitching skill, timing, and borrowed abilities together into a style that can pressure an enemy who thought it had already solved him. Sword dance keeps building until the skeleton can no longer treat Ikuta as a lucky powerless kid with borrowed tricks. The final sequence lands hard enough that the skeleton praises the technique, which is probably the nicest review anyone has ever given while getting carved apart. But Akuta does not get to relax, because more attackers press in and the fight expands around him. He keeps his focus and reads the battlefield instead of panicking, which shows the deeper problem of this war. Raw power is not enough unless he can understand what every enemy, ally, and hidden ability is doing in real time. Ikuta draws more power through the strange vessel around him, and the output rises again past what Momo expects from someone who is supposed to have zero magic. This is the larger rule taking shape. Ikuta's creation and copied skills are not isolated tricks. They can combine into something that threatens the false order built around the Seven Saviors. The onlookers can only call Ikuta impressive, but the practical question comes immediately after. Can Momo still move? That small check matters, because Ikuta's path to stopping the apocalypse is not a solo victory lap. It depends on who can survive beside him long enough to become useful in the war ahead. Back inside the exam trial, Ikuta has proven his impossible magic can protect Momo, but the cost lands fast. Momo, a participant in the licensed mage exam, admits she can barely move for a while. That means Ikuta's new alliance is real, but it is fragile, and fragile is a rough thing to be when the next threat opens its mouth right in front of them. The red creature surges in, so Akuta has to answer without relying on Momo as backup. He coats himself in lightning and wipes the thing out, proving the copied powers and creation are starting to work together under pressure, which is great news unless you are the giant set of teeth currently regretting attendance. A white-haired male observer notices the shift immediately and calls Ikuta's move out of character, which matters because Ikuta is no longer just surviving the exam. He is changing his own fighting style in real time, and other people are starting to realize the powerless boy is becoming hard to predict. Then Ikuta senses Miki's magic, and everything else becomes secondary. Miki is his older sister, and the reason he came back from the ruined future, so if her power is inside this place, Ikuta is not chasing points anymore. He is chasing the one person whose last command was to save the world. Ikuta understands the obstacle around him is not just architecture, it is a skill-built maze meant to keep him away from Miki, so he chooses the blunt answer. If the maze exists because of magic, he will break the magic, which is not elegant but does have the charm of being extremely direct. The maze gives way, and Ikuta reaches an interior space where Miki lies unconscious while an unnamed male figure stands near her. The rescue has finally caught up to the danger, but now Ikuta has to deal with the person who got to Miki first. The male figure acknowledges that Ikuta managed to break through, but his pause makes the victory feel wrong before Ikuta can even breathe. That single hesitation tells Ikuta the maze was only the outer lock, and whatever is happening to Miki has already moved deeper than a simple kidnapping. Ikuta drops in anyway, because the only choice he recognizes right now is taking Miki back. He demands her return and fires from the marked power on his body, turning his fear into force before the enemy can finish explaining the trap. The backlash does not settle Ikuta down. It pushes him further. His power flares, his focus sharpens, and he launches another massive attack upward, which shows the real problem for anyone trying to contain him. Threaten Miki, and Ikuta stops conserving strength. Now the confrontation shifts from rescue to revelation, because the white-haired male figure reacts as if Miki is not just Akuta's sister. He says she is their little sister, and Akuta's anger stumbles for the first time because that claim attacks the one certainty he has been protecting. The hooded male figure finally names the group, Mobius. He explains that Mobius are 5 warriors gathered from different dimensions by a certain mage, which means Akuta has not stumbled into a local exam conspiracy. He has touched the deeper machinery behind the world-ending war. Mobius finally lays out its job, and it is uglier than Akuta hoped. These 5 warriors do not simply guard an alternate dimension where monsters live. They maintain it, move those monsters into other dimensions, and keep the invasion system running, which means the apocalypse Akuta is trying to stop has workers behind the curtain. That truth does not sit cleanly even inside Mobius. One Mobius dissenter breaks under the weight of it, because he has spent too long hearing screams from the holes and pretending the machine he serves is still righteous. When the job description includes screams from holes, the moral paperwork is already on fire. So the dissenter makes the one choice Mobius cannot tolerate. He tells the others he doubts the mission. In a group built to support invasions, questioning the work is not a complaint, it is rebellion with witnesses. The argument burns into open conflict, but the dissenter still refuses to back down. He says he does not want to cause any more invasion. And that matters to Akuta because it proves Mobius is not a single mindless evil. It has fractures Akuta might actually use. The answer from Mobius is not debate, it is obedience by force. A male commander orders him to shut up and work. Nearby, Momo, the licensed mage exam participant, dragged into this deeper war, stands in the fiery chaos as undead forces gather, turning the whole truth into something Ikuta can no longer treat as distant lore. Ikuta takes the revelation on his knees, because the story of Mobius has just crashed straight into his own family. The dissenter chose abandonment over invasion, then escaped the alternate dimension with a book, trying to live peacefully somewhere else instead of feeding the world-ending machine. Back in the memory of that escape, Ikuta understands the hidden cost of one man leaving Mobius. A mark remains, a number in a system that treats people like replaceable parts. Then the story softens into something almost crueler, because after the escape, a child is taken by the hand, fed, walked home, and raised like a real child, not a weapon or a task list with hair. The memory keeps moving through ordinary days, and that is what makes it hurt. The woman raising the child gives him toys, light, food, and affection, until gratitude spills out of him, which tells Ikuta that Mobius did not just create enemies, it created people who wanted normal lives. Back in the present destruction, Roku, the powerful fighter Ikuta must eventually confront, recognizes how far Ikuta has come, and still tells him to run. That warning lands hard, because Roku is not bragging now. He is stating the scale of the wall in front of Ikuta. Ikuta does not answer by retreating. He leans into the memory of Miki, his older sister who sent him back with the order to save the world, and says she taught him, which means his resolve is no longer just about survival. It is about honoring the person who gave him the second chance. In the present destruction, Miki's voice becomes the thing Ikuta refuses to let die, and her faith pushes him past fear. Ikuta answers with a vow that is bigger than winning the fight. He is going home with his sister, which means this apocalypse does not get to keep her. The white-haired opponent tries to shut Ikuta out by calling this a family problem, as if saying family turns a world-ending mess into private paperwork. That command reveals the real argument here. Ikuta is not just fighting power, he is fighting someone who believes Ikuta has no right to interfere. Ikuta holds onto what Miki taught him, and the memory steadies him long enough to push his power further. For him, creation is no longer a strange gift from regression. It is the only way to repay the sister who gambled everything on him. Ikuta rises into his full strength, but the white-haired opponent doubles down and treats the destruction as his personal matter. So Ikuta stops arguing and forces his power forward, turning his promise to Miki into an answer the enemy cannot ignore. The breakthrough comes when Ikuta's power resolves into pure white light, a sign that his copied and created abilities are fusing into something cleaner than brute force. But the white-haired opponent still throws him back, which proves the gap is real, and this will not end with one dramatic shout and a convenient sparkle. Ikuta immediately changes the way he fights, because Miki is still in danger, and one careless attack could hit the person he is trying to save. When the threat shifts behind him, he reacts instead of panicking, showing that his growth is not just power, it is battlefield control. Ikuta starts chaining his skills instead of wasting strength head-on, using bind to restrict the enemy, and then layering fireball with gravity manipulation. That matters because he is no longer acting like a powerless boy borrowing tricks, he is building answers in real time, which is a very rude thing to do to someone trying to look untouchable. The white-haired opponent counters anyway, and Ikuta is forced back into defense just to stay in the fight. He blocks, absorbs the pressure, and regains his footing, which means the enemy still has the advantage, but Ikuta has stopped collapsing under it. Then the white-haired opponent states the problem plainly. No attack will hit him. Ikuta asks what kind of skill can do that, because if he cannot understand the rule behind this defense, all his power becomes expensive noise. The answer points back to regression itself. The white-haired opponent is furious that a child took regression magic away. He starts wondering who that magic was used on, and that turns Ikuta's hidden second chance into the center of the crisis, because the enemy is now circling the secret Miki died to give him. The white-haired opponent finally spells out why Miki matters. Ikuta's sister Miki still has leftover regression magic inside her, and if anyone uses it the wrong way, it creates a problem for his plan. His solution is brutal and simple, since Zero, the ancient mage being revived through the ritual, needs that power cleanly controlled. So he decides Miki has to die, and even rejects using traitors to handle it, which tells Ikuta this is not a negotiation, it is a cleanup job. Miki, the sister who already sacrificed everything once to send Ikuta back, tries to find the rule that can beat this enemy instead of panicking. But the white-haired opponent steps through a technique called Crest and mocks them with the worst possible answer. As long as his setup stands, attacks against him mean nothing. Miki fires back anyway, because when a man announces he is untouchable, sometimes the only available research method is hitting him in the mouth. The truth of the fight clicks into place. The opponent has not been casually blocking everything with some perfect defense. He prepared traps in advance and forced Ikuta's side to waste time swinging at the wrong problem. To actually stop him, they needed to find and destroy the exit built into his trap system. That means Ikuta was not losing to raw power alone. He was losing to a battlefield the enemy finished designing before the fight even started. Then the opponent reveals the checkmate. They are too late, and the ritual is already complete. Momo, a licensed mage exam participant caught in this disaster, reacts with the others as the room realizes the fight was only a delay tactic. Ikuta has been trying to save Miki and stop the apocalypse, but the enemy just used the battle to open the door wider. Miki is dragged into the ritual's pull, and Ikuta cries out for his sister, because the same person who gave him his second chance is now being taken as the price of it. The enemy taunts everyone struggling below, saying resistance is useless and tying this moment directly to the end of the world. For Ikuta, this is the nightmare version of his mission. The path to saving the world is now wrapped around Miki's body. The enemy explains why the disaster is happening now. Ikuta's enormous magic power has flooded the world past its normal limits. That abnormal buildup makes the world vulnerable enough for invasion, so Ikuta's greatest weapon has also become the signal flare for something worse. The power he gained to beat the false saviors is now being used as evidence that the world itself is ready to break. The ritual tears through them before anyone can turn that revelation into a plan. Ikuta is forced onto defense while the revival completes, and the white-haired opponent pushes the final command through. Zero will be revived. At that point, the fight stops being about beating one untouchable enemy, because the ancient threat behind him is finally entering the story. As the revival power surges, Ikuta is caught and held in place, unable to reach the center of the ritual in time. A tall male figure dismisses the struggle while a red-haired onlooker shouts for Ikuta, but the warning comes too late to change anything. Ikuta, the boy who started with no magic at all, now has so much power around him that he cannot even move when it matters most. The consequence lands outside the ritual chamber as the city erupts and whole structures collapse under the blast. This is the world maintenance system failing in plain terms. The balance that kept reality stable can no longer contain what Ikuta's power and Zero's revival have triggered. The apocalypse is no longer a prophecy Ikuta is trying to prevent, it is happening in front of him. In the ruined ritual chamber, Ikuta drops into the wreckage hard enough that the victory he was chasing turns into a full-body error message. Zero has awakened, and Ikuta's first reward for forcing the truth open is getting thrown through the disaster he helped unleash. Zero, the ancient mage being revived through the ritual, wakes up irritated instead of grateful, which is a very bad personality setting for someone this dangerous. He immediately understands the important part. Ikuta's actions are what pulled him back into the world. The answer starts with creation. Ikuta's impossible skill that should not exist in a boy born with no magic. As the power flares through a female figure, the story finally points at the real reason Ikuta matters. Creation is not just a useful trick, it is tied directly to the system holding the world together. That truth gets uglier as the same power keeps pouring out, because creation does not simply make weapons or copy skills anymore. It has become the key that wakes ancient forces, bends the world's rules, and invites every lurking threat to the front door. No appointment needed. The battlefield widens as the female figure faces a swarm of monsters, and this is where the apocalypse stops being one villain's comeback. If creation is the spark, then the monsters are the proof that the world maintenance system is losing control everywhere at once. Zero speaks to her like this catastrophe is something to celebrate, asking whether she is happy that he has awakened. That question lands like a confession. Zero sees the collapse not as damage, but as the beginning of the world becoming useful to him. Then Zero reveals the scale of what Ikuta has released, showing power so far beyond the saviors that their public legend looks embarrassing in hindsight. He even praises the female figure's power as beautiful, which is a charming thing to say while the world is actively falling apart. Above the chaos, a grateful voice cuts in and thanks Ikuta, and the name Roku finally connects this disaster to the people moving behind the prophecy. Roku's words make the situation sharper. Ikuta did not just fail to stop the revival, he helped restore something the enemy needed. Back inside the dark interior, Miki, Ikuta's older sister and the person who once sent him back with the order to save the world, is trapped while Ikuta can only shout for her. The cruel part is that this is the same nightmare from another angle. Ikuta is powerful now, but the enemy still knows exactly where to hurt him. The antagonist twists the knife by telling Ikuta he understands this is his fault, then points to the planet itself as proof that the awakened power is now enough for an invasion. In plain terms, the enemy has stopped treating Earth like a battlefield and started treating it like territory. Because Ikuta's choices reopen the path, a hidden ally skill begins returning, and that changes the board again. The power in that hand means the people tied to the higher dimensional fight are not all finished yet, even if the timing is absolutely rotten. When Ikuta's companion asks what kind of skill has returned, the answer matters more than the name. These powers belong to the five-dimensional warriors, people connected to the layer of reality above the broken world maintenance system, which means Ikuta is finally seeing the real war behind the fake savior myth. Now the identities start locking into place. Kanai, a female skill user tied to healing and blue flames, appears with Momo, a female exam participant Ikuta has already crossed paths with. Their return means the final fight is no longer just Ikuta versus Zero, because the people touched by these restored skills are gathering around the same collapsing truth. Ranbu, a member of the Seven Saviors organization, is introduced next, and that matters because the saviors were supposed to be humanity's answer to the apocalypse. If Ranbu is standing in this reveal, then the line between fake savior, useful ally, and hidden weapon is no longer clean at all. Then Miki steps into the center of the reveal, and her role hits hardest because Ikuta's entire second life began with her forbidden regression spell. She is not just the sister he wants to save, she is one of the key pieces explaining why Ikuta reached this moment at all. With Miki and Ranbu standing together, the scattered names finally become a force aimed at the same catastrophe. Their combined power erupts, and the story arrives at the brink of the final collision. Zero wants the world broken open. The higher dimensional warriors are moving at last, and Ikuta has to decide whether the power that caused this can still be used to save it. At the brink of the final disaster, Ikuta finally stops acting like a lone survivor, and declares himself the leader of the force that will save the world. Ranbu stands with him, and that matters because the fake savior system is no longer the center of hope. Ikuta is building a new answer with the people who actually showed up. But the people watching do not get instant comfort because the old fear is still sitting right there. The end of the world has beaten every plan before. One troubled voice admits they cannot stop it. Another sinks into helplessness, and Ikuta has to be snapped out of that spiral before despair does Zero's work for him. Bad timing for a breakdown, honestly, with extinction already waiting in the lobby. Ikuta forces himself to think past the apocalypse instead of freezing in front of it, and that choice pulls his power back into focus. Then he senses the thing he has been dreading, which means this is no longer preparation. The disaster has arrived early, and Ikuta's second life just lost the luxury of time. In the city now, Ikuta realizes the sky is opening, and monsters are pouring into the human world. He names it immediately, the invasion, the catastrophe his sister sent him back to prevent. Worse, the creatures are S-rank or higher, so this is not a warning shot, it is the apocalypse kicking the door off its hinges. Ikuta does not waste time asking why the invasion came too soon, because the answer will not save anyone standing under it. He plants himself in the collapsing city and chooses the only response left. Every monster that crosses over gets erased. That is the point of his creation now, not proving his worth but buying the world another minute. As Ikuta starts pushing back the invasion, Sage, the man tied into the Seven Saviors' truth, confirms the team has finally understood the problem correctly. Their mission has not changed, but their faith has. This time they are not waiting for worshipped idols to fix the disaster. They move as a group because stopping the end of the world now depends on shared power, not one pretty prophecy with terrible customer service. The first full collision proves how brutal the gap still is. Even with everyone committed, the enemy pressure does not simply break. Sage repeats the same conclusion because repetition is the whole point here. They cannot retreat to a smarter plan or a safer battlefield. They have one job left: stop the invasion here, or the future Miki died to create collapses with them inside it. The battle spreads across the city as the fighters pour everything they have into holding the line. Momo, the licensed mage exam participant, who once stood inside Akuta's path to power, realizes the scale of it when magic starts flowing through everyone at once. For a second, it looks like the team might finally turn individual abilities into one real counterattack. Then the sky darkens, snow starts falling, and the battlefield changes again before anyone can celebrate. The new ice-wielding enemy does not seem to need the same borrowed power, which means Ikuta's united front has reached the edge of the final fight against a force that can rewrite the conditions around them. The world-ending collision is no longer coming later, it is right in front of him. The ice enemy pushes the battlefield into its next nightmare, calling down a dragon while Ikuta stands his ground instead of wasting time on fear. The team answers his lead with a clean Roger, which matters because Ikuta can no longer win this as one gifted anomaly against the apocalypse. A serpent drops into the fight next, so Ikuta charges before the enemy can turn panic into a massacre. His allies stack Igao, Absolute Barrier, and Iron Umbrella around him, basically building him a runway made of other people's nerves, and that gives him permission to stop holding back. The antagonist sneers at the teamwork as pointless meddling, but Ikuta answers with 10,000 rain, and finally proves the borrowed power can do more than delay death. The serpent breaks under the pressure, which turns the team's defense into the first real opening of this final collision. Then the truth gets uglier. A frontline fighter recognizes the fallen enemies as Shield and Spear, two of the seven saviors the world worshipped as humanity's answer to disaster. That means Ikuta is not just fighting monsters anymore, he is exposing the rotten core of the prophecy, and one of them violently rejects being treated like the other. Across the burning battlefield, the fighters feel the impossible surge moving through them and realize it is Ikuta's power spreading into their hands. That changes the question from can Ikuta survive to can ordinary people with his copied strength behind them help tear down the fake saviors. Fear still hits them hard because most of these people are not even mages, and the enemies in front of them are the sort that usually end a conversation permanently. But one fighter tells the others to have courage, and Ikuta's power gives that speech actual weight instead of turning it into a funeral slogan. Red Flame lands as the team's first shared answer, and the mood snaps from terror into momentum. They are not suddenly stronger than the apocalypse, but for the first time they believe they can push back instead of waiting to be erased. The demon immediately punishes that confidence, knocking the advance off balance before the team can get comfortable. A winged figure enters the fight, which means the enemy side still has another card to play, right when Akuta's side starts acting like a real army. The counterattack forces one fighter to commit everything he has with Akuta's shared power behind him. He activates gravity manipulation, Kusano, choosing control over brute force because the team needs the enemy pinned, not merely scratched. Gravity manipulation crushes into the target, and the damage finally looks decisive. The cost is simple. Everyone has to trust Ikuta's borrowed power completely, because hesitation now would give the apocalypse its opening back. When the attack holds, the fighters celebrate in the middle of the chaos, and that small alright matters more than it sounds. Ikuta has brought them to the brink of the final fight, not as helpless spectators to the Seven Saviors' failure, but as people ready to collide with the world-ending threat themselves. The celebration dies fast, because the world-ending enemy answers their progress by declaring that this time, the world really will end. Space itself starts tearing open around him, and the fighters finally understand the problem. Ikuta's side has not reached the finish line. They have kicked the door off the final room. From those ruptures, a robed figure arrives with demonic creatures pouring down around him, turning the battlefield into a survival test before anyone can even ask questions. Akuta stands against the descent anyway, because if he backs off now, every power he copied and every ally he lifted up becomes useless decoration. The descending entity recognizes Ikuta as the human who should not exist in this equation, then rises into his full authority as if he owns the disaster personally. That matters because Ikuta is not facing a random monster wave anymore. He is facing the intelligence behind the collapse, and this guy has arrived with the confidence of someone reading from a victory receipt. Then a white crest appears, and the battlefield changes from panic to revelation. The crest does not merely announce power, it tears through the large monsters and proves that the enemy side has a rule Ikuta still has to decode before it kills everyone. Ikuta catches the real danger next. The monsters are no longer acting normally. When he demands an answer, the system lays it bare. The crest enhances magic power, strengthens the body, and amplifies killing instinct, which is a terrible 3-item menu when every item bites back. Akuta starts to realize what creation truly is, but the truth arrives mid-fight. Not in a classroom where anyone gets a chair and a polite explanation. The power in front of him declares that nothing is impossible, which turns creation from a useful skill into the key to the final confrontation. Ikuta finally names the presence, Zero, the ancient mage whose revival has been hanging over this disaster. A strange numbered vision flickers through the awakening, and Zero comes to himself disgusted, which tells Ikuta the final enemy is not just strong, he is awake enough to judge the world he plans to erase. Zero looks over the corrupted beings below and calls them stained with greed. Their grins only make his verdict harsher. Humanity to him is ugly, and that belief is what makes this fight bigger than survival, because he is not attacking people out of rage alone. He is making a judgment. Back in the ruined city, Ikuta gathers himself as Zero speaks directly to him, almost politely, about the wish he wants this human to hear. Zero says humanity has no value, then asks whether the natural order is beautiful, which is a calm way to announce mass extinction while standing in the middle of the mess he helped make. Zero pushes the verdict even further. Nothing deserves to stay alive, not even himself. That forces Ikuta's answer into its simplest form, so he unleashes pure white light and refuses to let Zero turn despair into law. The attack reaches Zero, and for the first time in this exchange, Ikuta's resistance leaves a mark instead of just buying time. Zero still stands inside the impact, but the meaning is clear. The final fight has begun, and Ikuta has dragged the end of the world close enough to hit. Back at the final battlefield, Ikuta has finally proved he can wound Zero, but that only raises the stakes. If he falls now, the hope Miki sent into the past dies with him. Zero, the ancient mage trying to erase humanity, recoils at first, then realizes Ikuta is still standing, and twists the moment into a threat against the entire world. If the light of salvation disappears, humanity loses power, hope, and the nerve to keep fighting, which is a very dramatic way to say Zero wants everyone to quit before the bill arrives. Because Ikuta refuses to break, Zero stops testing him and starts trying to lock his life down directly. The first counterattack proves the gap is still brutal. Ikuta's best hit does not finish Zero, and Zero answers as if Ikuta has only annoyed him. That forces Ikuta to face the ugly truth of this fight. Hurting Zero is possible, but surviving Zero is a separate exam with no retakes. Zero presses harder, chaining the binding power into a heavier strike meant to end the resistance before Ikuta can turn that small opening into a miracle. The battlefield buckles under the pressure, and even the surrounding creatures scatter, because when the apocalypse starts throwing a tantrum, nobody wants front row seats. Zero regains control of the exchange, which means Ikuta's proof of power has not become victory yet. Ikuta pulls away just long enough to keep breathing, but Zero uses that retreat to attack the one thing more fragile than his body, his courage. Zero asks whether Ikuta fears him, and the question lands because Ikuta knows exactly what losing here means. If he collapses now, the future Miki died to rewrite snaps right back toward destruction. Ikuta answers that fear by forcing his power to rise instead of running from it. The surge spreads beyond him and reaches the civilians watching nearby, turning his stand into a public verdict. The powerless boy everyone dismissed has become the person holding the line. Even Miki and the others can see the change, and for Ikuta that matters, because this fight is no longer only about beating Zero, it is about proving the world still has someone willing to save it. Ikuta steadies himself and chooses resolve over panic, because he cannot afford a heroic speech that ends with him flattened into the pavement. Zero mocks the idea that a human can defeat him, but Ikuta's answer is simple. He does not need to look invincible, he only needs to keep moving until Zero finally breaks. That is the turn here. Ikuta stops reacting to the apocalypse and starts committing to the final exchange. So Ikuta activates a skill combination, fusing Thorn User with Iron Body to turn borrowed power into a body that can actually endure Zero's next attack. Zero comes in to crush him, but Ikuta meets him head-on. And this time the exchange is not a desperate block, it is a declaration that humanity's last chance can hit back. Their powers erupt across the city, leaving the final fight hanging on one question. Did Ikuta finally match Zero, or did he just survive the opening bell? Still in the ruined city, Zero stops treating Ikuta like a nuisance and starts burying him under the kind of power that ended the future once already. Akuta answers by using blind skill, then stacks gravity manipulation, fireball, and meteor shower, trying to prove borrowed and created magic can pressure the origin of magic himself. Zero calls it pointless, which is rude, accurate, and exactly the problem. Zero retaliates with a force so far above Akuta's attack that the fight immediately turns from offense to survival. Akuta has to combine Future Sight with Absolute Barrier, not to win yet, but to stay alive long enough for the final answer. The barrier holds, and that matters because Akuta is no longer being erased on contact. But the cost shows right away. Even Ikuta can feel the ceiling of ordinary human magic closing in. So he reveals the real trick behind his growth, Thorn User, and lays out that gravity manipulation, Future Sight, Iron Body, Absolute Barrier, and Fireball are all creations he has been turning into weapons. Zero finally realizes Ikuta is not copying the world's rules, he is rewriting his way around them. That revelation flips Zero's attention to the one thing he still cannot explain, the strange white light Akuta used earlier. Zero demands to know what it is, and when Akuta strains under the pressure, Zero decides the lesson does not need a lecture hall. He will force the answer out through pain, which is a terrible teaching method, even by apocalypse standards. Zero declares that his desire is stronger, and the whole fight becomes a contest of will as much as magic. Ikuta braces, but the next surge tears across the city, and he understands the scale all at once. This is not one battlefield breaking, this is the world-ending power returning in front of him. The buildings vanish into the attack, and Ikuta reaches the brink of the final fight, knowing survival alone will not be enough. Years earlier in a library, Akuta once read the clue that now makes Zero's power terrifyingly clear. The legend said Zero, the progenitor mage, created all magic 150 years ago, which means Akuta is not fighting a strong mage, he is fighting the source code with a bad attitude. As the memory sharpens, the old book starts giving him the missing context behind the monster in front of him. Inside that legend, the mark tied to Zero becomes the beginning of the magic system humanity later worships and depends on. The story shows violence surrounding that origin, then explains that ancient magic was eventually divided into fire, water, wood, metal, and earth, while robed mages carried those powers forward. So the final collision is no longer just Ikuta versus Zero. It is a boy who was born with nothing challenging the man who shaped everything. Inside the ancient memory, Zero's damaged hand tells the real story before his mouth does. Magic did not make humanity noble. It made them impulsive. Zero remembers people using power the second they wanted something, and that disgust is what pushed him from saving the world to abandoning it. The memory turns darker as Zero faces the people of that era and decides they are not worth inheriting the power he gave them. He calls them demonic, claims he began the entire story of magic, and from that twisted ownership comes his final answer. If this world is his creation, he thinks he has the right to erase it. Back in the present, that belief becomes the rule of the fight. Zero says the stronger wish will decide everything. To him, humanity's extinction is not a threat, it is destiny, and he announces that Ikuta is finally coming to meet the wish that started this catastrophe. Ikuta reaches the center of that destruction and immediately rejects the demand to submit, which matters because Zero's entire power rests on forcing the world to obey his will. Even with demons pressing around him and Zero realizing something is wrong, Ikuta answers with the one thing he has built since regression, a wish strong enough to challenge the source of magic itself. Ikuta commits everything into one overwhelming release, not as a flashy trick, but as proof that the powerless boy from the old timeline can now stand against the man who created the system that rejected him. The attack tears through the battlefield and into the city around them, which means this final answer is no longer private. The whole world is paying the bill. When the devastation settles, an injured suited man lies bleeding as the aftermath keeps hammering the ground around him. Then a dark presence looms over him and the fight hits its brink. Zero's world-ending wish has been answered, but the final monster still has not fallen.